No matter how much the Yuji tried to cleanse himself, his hands remained stained with blood. After the horrific Shibuya incident, Itadori had spent most of his time hunting down curses. Day after day, he simply ate and ate, then continued his relentless pursuit. During one particular fight, a curse battered him mercilessly, only for Itadori to suddenly realize the monster had dropped dead. It just collapsed right onto him. That's right, the one who took it down was none other than Yuta. Let's rewind a few days. Naoya, a grade 1 sorcerer, found himself on the receiving end of a massive scolding. His father was on his deathbed, yet Naoya couldn't have cared less, even showing up late. The next Zenin clan head is going to be me anyway, he thought. In Naoya's eyes, his older brothers were utterly useless, and he showed no respect, only disgust, even for the two uncles in the room with him. However, when those two threatened him, he quickly used his dying father as an excuse, saying, "My dad's on his deathbed, so maybe be a little patient." Just then, a lawyer entered, announcing, "The clan head passed away mere minutes ago. Since all three of you are present, I will now read his last will and testament." As expected, Naoya was named the 27th head of the Zenin clan. He was set to inherit all assets, including the cursed tools from the Jujutsu School's Forbidden Vault. But there was a catch. He could only use them with the approval of those two uncles. Hearing this, Naoya visibly seethed with anger. What could he do? He had to accept it. The final clause stated that if, for any reason, Gojo died or lost his faculties, the family was bound by a vow to Toji. Megumi was to be welcomed into the home as the clan head. All assets would then transfer to him, overriding the father's current will. Naoya stormed out of the room, determined to find out where Megumi was. He heard from Lady that Megumi was currently on a mission in Tokyo, searching for Yuji, who was also Sukuna's vessel. Upon hearing this, Naoya immediately concocted a plan to eliminate both of them simultaneously. Tokyo was a living hell anyway, so who died wouldn't matter much. Once they were dealt with, everything would fall into place, he believed. "I absolutely must become the next clan head," he declared, after the numerous tragic deaths following the Shibuya incident, which had left Yuji steeped in despair. When Choso asked how he was, Yuji replied that, aside from the spots hit by Black Flash, he was mostly okay. "The important thing is, I can feel Sukuna's power growing inside me," he added. Choso reassured him, urging his younger brother to return to Jujutsu High, but Itadori flat out refused. He felt he had caused too many deaths and couldn't be near his friends. "Don't forget, I killed your brother," Yuji reminded him. Choso didn't hold a grudge at all, because he knew it was unintentional. With that, the two went out to hunt curses. On a bridge, Yuji made himself bait, luring them out. Two fierce monsters emerged, vying to attack, forcing him to flee for his life. Even with the bridge destroyed and standing upright, Itadori's speed didn't falter. He rocketed into the air, kicking a lurking curse to pieces, then plummeted back down, only to be snatched by another curse and dragged directly into the city. But before it could even get started, Yuji blew it to smithereens. After handling that, he slammed to a halt, then scaled a nearby apartment building to survey his surroundings. Suddenly, a curse lunged down for a sneak attack, but it had no effect. Yuji calmly sidestepped the blow and kept moving. He knew he was being chased by a horde of curses, so he sprinted into a tunnel. The monster saw this and immediately pursued, completely unaware they were running straight into a trap. The moment he heard his younger brother's call, Choso unleashed his attack, obliterating them with a single blood projectile. Seeing his older brother about to be ambushed by another curse, Yuji didn't hesitate, rushing in to defeat it with his fists, which thoroughly impressed Choso. "When we fought before, I knew you were strong," Choso thought, "but now you've also got this impressive agility and masterful control over your curse technique. You truly are my little brother." Choso vowed to keep calling Yuji his brother until he finally accepted it. More than anything, he wanted the young man to try and remember if their father also had a scar stitched across his forehead. Suddenly, Naoya appeared, looking for Megumi, but finding no trace of him, he turned his attention to Yuji, challenging him not to run. "You've been sentenced to death, you know," Naoya sneered, "since Professor Gojo isn't around to back you up anymore. It's thanks to his capricious nature that so many sorcerers have been saved." Naoya revealed that Megumi was the one they were truly after, so their fates didn't matter. "I need him to die," he declared, "and I hope he'll write a little something before he kicks the bucket." With that, Naoya suddenly teleported behind Yuji, delivering a diagonal blow to his jaw. Choso immediately rushed to help, but Naoya's speed was simply too immense. In no time, Choso became nothing more than a punching bag for the man to practice on, while Naoya, was busy admiring himself and stroking his hair, Choso managed a desperate counterattack, but it was futile and only earned him a retaliatory strike. Yuji seized the moment, throwing a rock that grazed Naoya's head, forcing him to keep his distance. He must be using some kind of speed technique to move like that, Yuji thought. Naoya admitted the two were more capable than he'd given them credit for. It seems I've underestimated you both, he conceded. Suddenly, all three felt a presence, something akin to Gojo, but far more terrifying. When they looked up, they saw a young man standing atop a nearby building. Though they didn't know who he was, Choso was certain he was there to kill Yuji. Seeing Yuta leap down, a sharp katana in hand, Naoya immediately raised his own hand, declaring, "I'm an ally." Through their brief exchange, Yuji recognized the newcomer as the second-year senior Megumi had mentioned, a special-grade sorcerer, just like Professor Gojo. Sensing the situation was dire, Choso urged Yuji to run. "Don't worry about me," he insisted, "you're the one they're after. Focus on escaping Yuta. Fighting him means certain death." With that, Choso promised to meet his younger brother at yesterday's spot. In a flash, Naoya darted forward, deflecting an attack, while Yuji found himself relentlessly pursued. Even though he was already running as fast as he could, on the other side, Naoya quickly realized his opponent was using blood manipulation. To use piercing blood, you first need to use flowing red scale, which drains a massive amount of your blood, he deduced. In short, you're going to die a miserable death. Hearing this, Choso's eyes narrowed dangerously, and he snarled, "You think you can lay a hand on my brother and walk away unscathed?" After struggling for a while, Yuji decided to counterattack and confront him head-on. He had to be extremely careful, because even the slightest mistake would mean instant death. The only thing Yuji could do was focus on dodging to save his life. After blowing the young man away, Yuta suddenly confessed, "Actually, I'm quite weak. But on the upside, I have far more cursed energy than even Gojo-sensei. However, he possesses the Six Eyes, so when he activates his technique, his cursed energy consumption is almost zero. My cursed energy, on the other hand, can still run out." Having explained this, Yuta continued to charge forward, slashing to end his target's life. During the fight, Yuji suddenly recalled what Todo had told him. The better a sorcerer is, the harder it is to see the flow of their cursed energy. You can't read their movements until the very last moment before impact. But the problem was, Yuta's entire body and his sword were constantly overflowing with cursed energy. Every single one of his attacks felt like a sure kill move, and Yuji couldn't predict any of his movements. Even so, he had no intention of dying here. There were simply too many things left unresolved. Stubbornly, Yuji leapt through a car, taking the opportunity to snatch a knife from the seat. Gojo-sensei had never taught his students how to use weapons, believing that over-reliance on cursed tools could lead to neglecting cursed energy control. So, weapons were only for emergencies, he'd said. Just as Yuta thought, the kid was too focused on his sword and inadvertently exposed an opening. Yuta immediately kneed him directly in the stomach, then shattered the knife with his blade, injuring Yuji. Seizing the moment, the young man swiftly kicked and broke Yuta's sword, disarming him. Yuji then rushed forward, attempting to counterattack, but was suddenly restrained by the cursed spirit Rika. No matter how much Yuji struggled, it was useless. The creature was simply too strong. Yuta slowly approached, then thrust his sword straight through Yuji's heart. "I'm sorry I had to do this to you, Yuji." After Yuji was dispatched by his senior, Sukuna suddenly sensed something and chose not to intervene. Meanwhile, Choso was being utterly pummeled by his opponent, completely lost. Naoya's attack speed was so blisteringly fast that Choso couldn't even discern his technique. Naoya continued to deliver a barrage of bruising blows, inflicting countless wounds on Choso, who even struggled to control the blood flowing from his body. Yet, as the eldest brother among his siblings, Choso still struggled to his feet, activating flowing red scale to try and defeat his enemy. Naoya seemed unconcerned, only wanting to understand Choso's cursed technique and his stubborn resilience. When Choso stubbornly refused to answer, Naoya decided to attack as before. To his surprise, Choso managed to keep up with his movements, forcing Naoya to resort to the hidden weapon he carried. He stabbed Choso once in the stomach with a knife, and realized his opponent was using flowing red scale, concentrating his strength in his external eyes to enhance his movement observation abilities. Unfortunately, Naoya was always vigilant, making it incredibly difficult for Choso to counterattack. Naoya arrogantly acknowledged Choso's ability to stop bleeding, then taunted him. "In the sorcerer world, it's quite embarrassing to be caught carrying weapons. Yet my brothers parade around with their weapons looking pathetic. I don't understand what right they have to disrespect Toji." Naya didn't hesitate to openly declare his intense dislike for his siblings. What's the point of living as an older brother if you're weaker than your younger sibling? Choso retorted. Whether skilled or not, an older brother is always a role model for his younger brother. I'm willing to stray from the path so my brothers can avoid my mistakes. Since he had no one to guide him, Choso had made countless errors. Even so, he accepted the role of paving the way for his younger siblings. After a brief exchange, Naya was horrified to discover a pool of blood on the ground. From that pool, Choso transformed it into a surging wave that pursued him. The Cursed Womb. Death paintings are hybrids of cursed spirits and humans, possessing a unique physique that allows them to convert cursed energy into blood. As long as their cursed energy doesn't run out, they can't die from blood loss. Naoya struggled immensely to escape the pursuit, his legs growing heavier with each step. Is he controlling the blood on my clothes? He wondered. Despite being targeted by Choso, Naoya remained unfazed, because his technique allowed him to simulate and copy 24 frames of movement in advance, so even if he was bound, moving wasn't an issue. Instead of rushing, Choso calmly unleashed a self-created technique he had honed over 150 years. The drops of blood falling through the air exploded, catching Naoya completely off guard. Wounded, he lay on the ground, unable to get up. Choso approached, intending to deliver the finishing blow when Yuta suddenly appeared. Choso, stunned, didn't even have time to turn his head before he was instantly knocked out. Naoya, looking at Yuta's contemptuous gaze, became bitter and resentful. When he learned the blood manipulation contained poison, he realized Choso wasn't human. If things continued, Naoya would surely die, as his body was rejecting the strange toxic blood. Seeing this, Yuta offered a condition. I'll use reverse curse technique to heal you. In return, please report to the higher-ups that Itadori is dead. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, the protagonist saw his grandfather urging his father to stay away from that woman. The person his grandfather was warning him about was none other than Itadori's mother, a woman with a stitched scar across her forehead. When he finally awoke, still disoriented, he found Yuta sitting opposite him. Itadori, still wary that Yuta might try to kill him, watched as his opponent suddenly sighed with relief, then offered a friendly smile. Yuta explained, "Back in September, Gojo-sensei came to me and asked me to look after you. That's why I staged that whole act, to deceive the higher-ups." Gojo-sensei had suddenly gotten a bad feeling, so he'd asked Yuta to keep an eye on the first and second-year students. He was especially worried about Itadori, which is why he'd specifically asked Yuta to watch over the boy. To fool the higher-ups, Yuta had to make a binding vow to attack the protagonist. The reason Itadori was still alive was thanks to Yuta's reverse curse technique. The instant Itadori's heart stopped, Yuta simultaneously used the technique to heal him. This marked the second time Itadori had died a fake death. But Yuta suspected the truth would likely come out soon. For now, his execution was temporarily considered complete. Yuta helped Itadori because he was important to people who were important to Yuta. Besides, the kid wasn't at fault for any of this. The power he carried wasn't truly his own. Seeing Itadori wallowing in self-pity and blaming himself, Megumi suddenly stepped forward, urging him to return to Jujutsu High. The school's barrier was currently weakened, making it possible for him to come back. Itadori stubbornly refused, feeling he had stained his hands. "Many people died because of my mistakes." Megumi simply sighed, reminding his friend, "We're not heroes, we're jujutsu sorcerers. No one can truly punish us. We don't have time to think about ourselves anymore. All you can do now is try your best to save people. Please, Itadori, save me." Kenjaku had bestowed curse techniques upon a group of individuals and created a game for them to kill each other, called the Culling Game. Megumi's sister had been drawn into this game, so he needed Itadori's help. "I need your strength to save her," he pleaded. He explained that according to the rules, the Culling Game would last 19 days. If anyone violated the rules, their curse technique would be taken away. Anyone who stepped into a barrier would immediately be considered a player. Players earned points by ending the lives of other players. Taking a sorcerer's life would grant 5 points, while a non-sorcerer's life yielded 1 point. Additionally, players could use 100 points to negotiate with the Game Master and add a new rule to the Culling Game. The Game Master was compelled to accept any new rule, unless it severely impeded the game itself. If a player's points remained unchanged for 19 days, that person would still lose their cursed technique. Hearing all this, Itadori turned to Yuta and confided in him about losing control in Shibuya. "If Sukuna takes over my body again next time, please kill me," he begged. For now, Megumi wanted the group to return to Jujutsu High and contact Master Tengen. They needed to find a way to unseal the prison realm and discover Kenjaku's specific objectives. To meet Tengen, The group had to choose the correct door from thousands that constantly shifted positions. Only one led to his star corridor. Before setting off, Itadori wanted an update on Nobara. From Megumi's saddened expression, Itadori painfully realized that their friend hadn't made it. Suddenly, Choso poked his head out, revealing, "We still have a way to find that hidden barrier. Don't forget, Mahito once stole Sukuna's fingers from us. We'll use a similar method to locate it." The next morning, Yuta rushed down anxiously, checking on Maki, who was covered in numerous burns. Yuki explained that if it weren't for her incredible heavenly restriction, the girl would surely have been dead. After, everyone was present. Choso immediately got to the main topic. Beyond the door leading to the Star Corridor, there's a forbidden vault storing the school's cursed tools and objects. 6 of my brother's remains are there, so I can sense their presence through my technique. To everyone's confusion, Ittori then introduced, "This is my older brother." Hearing this, Choso was so moved he wanted to give him a hug, but the group quickly pulled him along to search for the door. Guided by Choso's senses, the group swiftly found the hidden door leading to the Star Corridor. While moving, Choso finally located the resting place of his 6 younger brothers' remains. "Just wait a little, I'll come back for you all later," he whispered. After descending in the elevator, Itadori witnessed echoes of events from 12 years prior. Yuki believed that perhaps everything began to twist and distort from that point. With that, the group continued straight to the main hall. Inside was a vast, white, expansive space that made everyone wonder. "Perhaps this place has rejected us," someone muttered. Just as the group was about to give up, Tengen suddenly appeared, greeting them. "It's a great pleasure to meet all of you, including Sukuna's vessel." Episode 3. Most everyone present was welcomed by Tengen, except for Yuki. Tengen was concerned that Yuki might be an accomplice of Kenjaku, emphasizing the need for extreme caution with someone capable of body swapping like him. Despite possessing immortality, Tengen still aged. Anyone living for 500 years would end up looking exactly like this. 12 years ago, after failing to merge with the Star Plasma vessel, Tengen had rapidly aged, and her sense of self had gradually faded. The group seemed rather uninterested, as they were there to inquire about Kenjaku's objective and how to unseal the prison realm. Tengen agreed, on the condition that 2 people remain there as her bodyguards. Facing a barrage of questions from the group, he closed her eyes and revealed Kenjaku's true goal: to force all of humanity across Japan to evolve. Megumi wondered why Kenjaku hadn't simply used Tengen's barriers and idle transfiguration to turn everyone into sorcerers back then. Tengen simply explained that he lacked the cursed energy to do so. Kenjaku's chosen method was to assimilate humanity with Tengen. However, the problem was that only Star Plasma vessels could assimilate with her. But since that incident, Tengen had evolved significantly compared to 12 years prior. Therefore, assimilation with others was no longer impossible. Even her soul had evolved and now existed everywhere. Heaven and earth had become my true self. Those who assimilated with him would transcend even sorcerers. Because he possessed barrier techniques, he could retain her form and sanity. If humanity were to evolve and even one person lost control, the world would be annihilated. This meant there would be no more distinction between individuals. The impurities of 100 million people would flood the world. However, Tengen only knew this much. The specific reasons remained unclear. After his evolution, he was closer to a cursed spirit than a human, meaning Kenjaku could potentially use cursed spirit manipulation to absorb her. And that was also the reason. Tengen's true self had rejected everything from entering the Star Corridor. Hearing this, Yuki couldn't help but wonder why Kenjaku was only acting now after all these years. Tengen explained that it was because Tengen, the Star Plasma vessels, and the Six Eyes were bound by a karmic relationship. Kenjaku had been defeated twice by users of the Six Eyes. Since then, he had acted with extreme caution, eliminating all Star Plasma vessels and Six Eyes users within a month of their birth. But on the day of assimilation, both had appeared simultaneously, forcing Kenjaku to shift from killing to sealing. At any given time, only one person with the Six Eyes existed. Toji's interference in the events 12 years ago had thrown everything into chaos. The death of the Star Plasma vessel had shattered their collective fate. Seizing this opportunity, Kenjaku swiftly took action. He established the culling game to prepare for the assimilation. This game utilized cursed energy domains in the player's boundaries to perform a ritual that would transport people from this nation to the other side. Afterward, he would begin to assimilate with Tengen. To maintain such a large-scale ritual, Kenjaku himself had to abide by certain restrictions. Ironically, he wasn't the game master of the culling game. This meant that even if Kenjaku were to die, the game would not end. Coupled with this was a rule ensuring the continuation of the culling game to prevent any interruption to the ritual. So, the group's plan was to accumulate 100 points to negotiate with the Game Master. Then they would add a rule allowing unwilling players to exit. Additionally, they needed to find a way to free Gojo-sensei and rely on him to carry the team. To finalize, Shoso and Yuki both volunteered to stay there as bodyguards. Shoso wanted to seize this chance to end Kenjaku's life and avenge his brothers. As for Yuki, she wished to remain and discuss further, allowing Yuta to depart. Once they agreed, Tengen handed the group the back of the prison realm, an item necessary to free Gojo-sensei. The unfortunate truth was that even with it, he would still be sealed within the back face. Typically, to break it open, one would need either the inverted spear of heaven or another special tool. Ironically, Gojo-sensei himself had destroyed both of those items. It turns out he literally sabotaged himself. Yuta and Miguel had flown to Africa searching, but none remained. Among the players in the culling game was a sorcerer from 1,000 years ago, who called herself the Angel. Her cursed technique could nullify any other technique. With the Angel's technique, they could break open the back of the prison realm. This person was currently located within the Eastern Tokyo barrier. In total, there were 10 barriers across the country, all connected to a boundary that would transport the people of Japan to the other side. Crossing the river, or more accurately, the boundary, to the other side held significant meaning in Jujutsu. Currently, all citizens in Japan were being cursed in preparation for the assimilation. Hokkaido would remain unaffected, as that land had been transformed into a gigantic sacred ground. Tanjin speculated that the ritual would be completed within 2 months. Right now, the awakened players, including Megumi's sister, only had 10 days left to play. Players who refused to participate in the culling game would have their curse techniques stripped away. This was effectively a death sentence. According to Gojo-sensei's friends, this loss of technique wasn't caused by idle transfiguration. It was a stripping away, not a prohibition. So anyone who refused would simply vanish. On the bright side, Maki wouldn't face this risk since she had no curse technique. As for Panda, it was a toss-up. Who knew if he even had a brain? Regular people, once they reached 100 points, would be given at least one chance to escape. From the outset, players were fully aware of the goal to escape the barrier, so it was better to imprison them from the start than to let them voluntarily enter. The remaining rules were fundamentally not too difficult to understand. Regarding the Game Master, each player would receive a Shikigami attached to them. The Game Master should be understood as the culling game program itself. Since it couldn't erase pre-existing rules, it could only add new ones to indirectly negate them. However, to achieve 100 points, players were compelled to kill others. If they didn't kill anyone within 19 days, their cursed technique would be stripped. With the explanation complete, Maki would return to the Zenin clan to retrieve cursed tools. Shoso and Yuki would remain there as bodyguards. After Gojo was sealed in the prison realm, the cursed tools in the school's vault had been taken by 2 major clans. Luckily, Megumi had become clan head, so Maki could freely go and retrieve weapons. Once that was done, she would go find Panda. Yuta, meanwhile, would enter the culling game to gather as much information as possible before Megumi and his sister joined. He didn't want to fight his allies, so he could avoid nearby barrier domains. The barriers could block signals, meaning everyone would be unable to communicate for a while. Hearing this, Itadori got an uneasy feeling. Fearing Sukuna might switch places with him. What if something happens if I don't go with Yuta? He worried. Megumi, seeing his distress, patted his back reassuringly. Everything will be fine, now's not the time to worry about that. Since they were short on numbers, Yuta's group would go meet and recruit a suspended third-year senior. He's very unpredictable, but when he gets serious, he's incredibly strong, Megumi explained. Before leaving, Itadori didn't forget to thank Choso for his help. Choso, utterly content, told his younger brother not to die, then burst into tears. At the same time, a 35-year-old comedian was being relentlessly scolded by his manager for a poor performance. He simply vented his frustration to clear his head, then left as if nothing had happened. After he departed, a bearded man nearby told the comedian a harsh truth. There are 2 types of people who are famous forever. Those who are truly funny and those who can always believe they are funny. Which type are you? Hearing this, the comedian fell into a state of confusion, unsure what he should do to salvage his career. Episode 4. Upon returning to the clan, Maki was subjected to Naoya's terrible insults. He even considered whether he should torture her as he had before. Maki didn't care. She simply walked straight to the cursed tool vault, having been granted permission by the clan head. Megumi had initially refused the position, but was forced into it by the elders. If you become the clan head, we'll gain more information about the big 3 families, they told him. Megumi realized it would be pointless to hand the position over to Maki as no one would accept her. He had inherited the clan's technique and mastered a domain expansion. Not to mention he possessed many other qualities, while Maki still lacked the necessary capabilities. On her return to the clan, Maki ignored everyone, including her mother. Her sole objective was to retrieve the cursed tools and leave that place as quickly as possible. However, what Maki hadn't anticipated was that her father had been waiting for her. Upon learning that Megumi had become the clan head and sought to mend ties with other clans, the higher-ups had condemned those rebels who plotted to free Gojo. This, he figured, was the perfect time to strike at Megumi. Maki and Mai's father, knowing his daughters were headed for the cursed tool vault, had moved ahead, designating the place as their tomb. With that, he took a stance, using the secret technique Falling Blossom Emotion, then waited for Maki to enter his range before drawing his sword and attacking. In mere seconds, she effortlessly shattered his blade, but ultimately she was the one who took a fatal blow and collapsed. The reason he hadn't become clan head, he explained, was because he had 2 failed daughters. The father, coldly dragging their bodies, sneered at his 2 girls. "I'm a jujutsu sorcerer, not a swordsman, so don't assume you've won just because my sword broke. It's only because his 2 daughters' abilities were so weak that he wasn't chosen as the prospective clan head. His actual strength was hardly inferior to his younger brothers. Children who stand in a parent's way are utterly unacceptable," he declared. The ruthless father threw the 2 sisters into a room where countless cursed spirits, grade 2 and below, were imprisoned as punishment. "They'll swarm out and devour you both soon enough." After the father left, Mei crawled over to check her sister's wounds. Despite her severe injuries, Maki was incredibly resilient. After examining her, Mai proceeded to do what she believed was a terrible thing. A short while later, Maki woke up to find herself lying on a beach created by her sister's technique. Mei knew she would die sooner or later, so she walked straight into the sea. At that moment, Maki finally understood why twins were considered an ill omen for sorcerers. The idea that to gain one thing you had to lose another didn't apply to twins. That's because, in Jiu-Jitsu, twins were considered a single entity. This meant no matter how much Maki struggled or craved power, it was meaningless. As long as Mei existed, Maki would always be incomplete. Therefore, Mai would leave one thing for her sister and discard everything else. All of Mai's cursed energy would be taken by her sister, in exchange for Mai's promise to destroy everything. With her dying breath, Mai offered a contented smile, then passed away, leaving her sister with deep regret. No matter how much Maki called out, her sister didn't respond. Suddenly, the old man sensed that all the curses had vanished. The murderous aura emanating from the warehouse sent shivers down his spine, reminding him of a feeling from years past. But instead of giving up, he unleashed his technique, Tozen's bone-burning grudge, determined to incinerate Maki's very bones. The old man launched a provocative attack, only to find himself in the next world before he even realized it. Maki, with chilling resolve, struck without hesitation, beginning her massacre of the clan alongside her sister's memory. When the alarm bells rang, the entire Zenin clan was thrown into chaos. Naoya and the others wouldn't have believed even in their wildest dreams that Maki had personally dispatched the old man. By order of the head of the Cursed Tools Storage Unit, the subordinates were to split up and try to capture her alive for him to deal with. The men of the Zenin clan, who lacked cursed techniques, were compelled to join this unit. Maki herself had once belonged to the Cursed Tools Storage Unit before entering Jujutsu High. Despite being surrounded by her family, Maki dedicated her entire mind to recalling the moment she'd spent with Mei. Ultimately, she wanted to apologize to her sister and would destroy everything, just as she had promised the girl. Seeing them all charge in simultaneously, Maki didn't hesitate, ending them with a single blow. For these small fry, she only needed a few swift movements to take them all down. Each sharp sword stroke was unleashed with no other goal than to claim lives. The enemies rushed forward like moths to a flame, meeting a bitter end. A truly gruesome fate awaited them. Before long, Maki had painted the room red with fresh blood. The Cursed Tool Storage Unit, though numerous, couldn't land a single blow on Maki. They were a pathetic bunch, only able to helplessly receive blows and pass into the next world. It was a horrific end, one they could never have imagined. Maki was like a machine of destruction. Wherever she went, enemies fell. After all the cannon fodder had disconnected from the server, the squad leader finally entered, utterly shocked by the bloody scene. While Maki wasn't looking, an old man unleashed his cursed technique. The ground where Maki stood suddenly transformed into 2 gigantic hands. They carried the blood of those who had fallen and began to close, intending to crush her from within. The squad leader felt relieved seeing the Hei unit appear, meaning he wouldn't have to face that woman. The Hei unit consisted of members recognized as semi-grade 1 or higher by Jujutsu High standards, meaning they were arguably the strongest sorcerers in the Zenin clan. Seeing Maki suddenly charge down to attack, the squad leader broke into a cold sweat. He cautiously maintained his distance, retaliated, and felt bewildered. Why is she still moving after taking that old man's attack? Maki lunged forward like a wild beast, delivering a fierce attack, then used her bare hands to rip open an artery, finishing him off instantly. Seeing this, the old man immediately rushed to assist, but Maki was too fast. She cruelly did the same to him, completely unaware she had fallen into a trap. Even with the entire squad combining their efforts to restrain her, they couldn't stop Maki. To keep her still, the young man was forced to exert all his strength. Yet he still couldn't halt the monstrous woman. Maki calmly tore out the eyes that were restraining her, but it was useless. The young man had decided to use his very life to hold her back. The Zaiming clan continued to exist because of Toji's capricious nature. Maki had become just like him. For the safety of the clan, the uncle put all his power into unleashing countless punches to eliminate the threat. From the sky, a merciless barrage of fists rained down on Maki. It was an incredibly destructive attack, designed to ensure she was utterly obliterated. After the shockwave subsided, the young man confidently departed this mortal coil, completely unaware that the one who delivered the blow had been reduced to a mere skull. Watching Maki expressionlessly toss the uncle's head into the pond, Naoya still didn't change his arrogant demeanor. Her current appearance reminded him of Toji. He recalled how, when people said the Zenin clan head was a loser with no cursed energy, Naoya eagerly rushed to see his pathetic face, only to be profoundly impressed by the killing intent radiating from the man. Back in the battle, Naoya relentlessly unleashed countless attacks, aiming straight for Maki. In his eyes, she was nothing more than a common brat, not Toji. The sin of the weak is not realizing the strength of their opponent, he thought. You are definitely not him, because the one who stands there can only be me. Naoya's projection sorcery technique didn't allow movements that ignored trajectory and physical laws. At the moment of technique activation, there was a maximum limit to increasing the body's speed. However, maintaining the technique would allow speed to continue to increase. After that humiliating defeat, Naoya had learned his lesson and was no longer careless. Ironically, Maki had seen through his strategy and found a way to defeat him. When she extended her hand, ready for a direct confrontation, Naoya remained completely unfazed as his projection sorcery was still active. Anything he touched would move at 24 frames per second, and if he failed, it would result in a 1-second immobilization. He subtly touched Maki's shoulder, then carefully maneuvered behind her to strike, knowing that a direct confrontation would surely lead him into her trap. Ironically, it was Maki herself who anticipated Naoya's intention and suddenly spun around to deliver a blow. "Thanks to this body," she declared, "I can finally clearly see that you perform 24 movements every second." With that, Maki punched Naoya squarely in the face, instantly shattering his bones. Having defeated him, she calmly walked through the house searching for her mother. When she found her, Maki asked why her mother had told her to turn back earlier. But her mother was consumed by fear, so Maki unhesitatingly finished her off. While Maki was distracted, Naoya, with his ruined body, was desperately trying to escape. Ironically, Maki's mother found him and stabbed him. To his very last breath, Naoya couldn't believe he had died such a miserable death. Deep down, the mother felt joy at having given birth to her 2 daughters. Upon receiving the news, Maki's friend immediately arrived at the scene and burst into tears, realizing Mei was no longer alive. Maki then asked her seniors to handle the rest, and continued on her way to deal with the remaining Zenin bloodline members outside, personally putting an end to this wretched clan. Maki eventually departs from the compound, carrying the lifeless body of her sister Mai, draped over her shoulder in a heartbreaking scene. During her exit, she crosses paths with Momo, who immediately breaks down into tears upon seeing her fallen friend, filled with regret for not being able to prevent this tragedy. Maki coldly but solemnly entrusts Mai's remains to Momo's care, after which she walks away. This brutal purge led to the near-total annihilation of the Zenin clan's core members. When the forensic investigators arrived, they didn't even need to look for clues to identify the perpetrator, as every single corpse bore the mark of a specific type of execution by an incredibly lethal and mysterious curse tool that left no room for doubt. Fast forward a few days, and the Gojo and Kamo clans have officially lobbied the Jujutsu headquarters to have the Zenin clan stripped of its status and expelled from the Big Three families, a verdict that currently remains, officially pending a final decision. Officially designated Principal Masamichi Yaga as the scapegoat for the entire Shibuya incident, placing every ounce of blame on his shoulders. However, the true motivation behind this harsh sentence likely stems from a much darker agenda. The stubborn old man Gakuganji arrived to interrogate Yaga about the secret behind cursed corpses that possess self-awareness and can regenerate their own cursed energy, just like Panda does. With that specific knowledge, the authorities could potentially manufacture an entire army of artificial soldiers, a prospect that deeply unnerves the higher-ups. Thinking back on his beloved creations, Yaga shares a final, tender moment with young Takeru, explaining that he'll be away on a very long business trip soon. He tells the boy that it's going to be a while before he returns. He reassures the boy that the forest is safely under Master Tenjin's protection and that Takeru's mother will be visiting frequently, so everything will be alright. The children watch Yaga depart with heavy hearts, their eyes filled with sadness as they confess how lonely they'll feel without his presence. Meanwhile, the higher-ups have already set a trap. Panda has been taken into custody as bait to force Yaga into the open. However, help was already on the way. Kusakabe steps in to rescue Panda, motivated by a profound debt of gratitude he owes to Principal Yaga. We look back at a time when Kusakabe brought his grieving sister to visit Yaga and Takadru. In that moment, Takeru realized that the woman standing before him was actually his mother. The two shared an overwhelming, tearful reunion as their emotions finally overflowed. Yaga felt the need to apologize to Kusakabe for the complicated circumstances surrounding their secret meeting. He explained that the existence of cursed corpses with independent consciousness must remain a strict secret from the world. Because of this, Takeru could never truly live a normal life with Kusakabe's sister. Despite the tragedy, Kusakabe was deeply moved by Yaga's kindness. He expressed his sincere thanks, believing that Takeru's existence was the only thing that allowed his sister to keep going until now. Refusing to hide or flee from his fate, Yaga proceeds to meet with Panda and faces destiny. When confronted by the executioners, Yaga shows no sign of yielding. He has absolutely no intention of handing over the secrets of his cursed corpses to the corrupt higher-ups just to save his own skin. He stands his ground, ready for a fight, noting that the people standing before him have certainly grown bold now that Satoru Gojo is safely sealed away. Suddenly, their tense confrontation is cut short by the haunting sound of stringed music echoing through the air. Principal Gakuganji of the Kyoto School makes his entrance as the designated executioner tasked with ending Yaga's life. It was a brutal struggle, and Gakuganji even had to break his own guitar in half just to finally bring the principal down. As the light fades from his eyes and his life begins to slip away, Yaga finally decides to disclose the ultimate secret behind the creation of Panda and the true nature of his sentient cursed corpses. He whispered the forbidden truth of the cursed corpses to Gakuganji. To successfully manufacture a cursed doll that possesses a free will of its own one that doesn't require any external input of cursed energy, the creator must carefully infuse the core with 3 souls that are perfectly compatible with one another. Inside the core, these 3 souls must constantly observe, interact, and essentially clash with each other until a perfect state of equilibrium is achieved and a true self emerges. Gakuganji is absolutely stunned by this revelation. He asks why Yaga would wait until his final breath to share this information. If he had spoken sooner, he could have easily avoided his death sentence. But Yaga simply replies that this revelation is his final act. He tells him that this knowledge is a curse being passed from him to Gakuganji to carry forever. After breaking free from his confinement, Panda races to the scene, but he's already too late. He finds his father lying motionless on the ground, surrounded by a pool of blood. Despite the immense grief and the sight of his creator's killer standing right there, Panda makes the shocking choice not to attack the man who took his father's life. Gakuganji asks the question we're all thinking. Does Panda harbor hatred for him? Panda's response is enough to break anyone's heart. He explains that he doesn't hate the old man, viewing him as nothing more than a blade being wielded by the higher-ups. He recognizes that Gakuganji was just following orders from above. However, he leaves him with a chilling warning to keep in mind for the future. Even a panda knows how to shed tears after losing a father figure. Following the cryptic instructions left by Master Tengen, Yuji and Megumi track down an abandoned parking garage that serves as the base of operations for Kinji Hakari. This guy is a third-year student at Jujutsu High, but he's currently suspended because of his constant clashes with the conservative higher-ups. Right now, he's busy running a secret underground fight club. What's wild is that the fighters stepping into the ring are all jujutsu sorcerers. Megumi quickly realizes that Hakari is flagrantly violating Article 8 of the Jujutsu regulations regarding the confidentiality of their world. Knowing that Hakari is a complete rebel operating deep in the criminal underworld, Yuji and Megumi decide the best move is to ditch their school uniforms to avoid making a bad first impression. They remove their recognizable gear to fly under the radar. While many people dismiss Hakari as a lazy delinquent, as they try to enter Hakari's territory, they are immediately stopped by a bouncer who talks down to them, telling these little kids to go home and stop wetting their beds. Megumi thinks fast and fabricates a cover story to deceive the guard, pretending they are just desperate guys looking to earn some quick cash in the ring. The doorman tries to intimidate Megumi with some tough talk, but it backfires completely. Megumi doesn't blink. Instead, he turns the tables and threatens the guy right back with a cold stare. While the guard realizes things are getting way more intense than he expected. Hakari is actually watching the whole confrontation through security cameras from his control room. He decides to let them in, and chooses Yuji to be the one to step into the ring today, bypassing Megumi entirely. This actually works out perfectly for their plan. Megumi realizes that a physical brawl is exactly where Yuji's natural talents shine the brightest. However, they still need to play their parts convincingly. To keep Hikari from getting suspicious, Megumi puts on a convincing act, acting like he's annoyed and really wants a turn in the spotlight too. After a bit of back and forth arguing, Megumi finally relents and agrees to follow Hikari's terms. With that bit of theater out of the way, they successfully make it past the entrance and deeper into the facility. Yuji is feeling a bit on edge about the whole situation. Megumi tells him not to sweat it, pointing out that if Hikari is monitoring the cameras, he must be close by. They split their roles. Yuji will take to the stage to draw everyone's eyes, while Megumi slips into the restricted areas to find a way to confront Hikari directly. Their main goal is to talk things out peacefully first. Megumi is fully aware that if Hikari refuses to cooperate, or if he gets caught sneaking around, Yuji's cover will be blown instantly. Force will have to be their final option because Samiki's time is running out fast. Yuji is led to the waiting room where one of Hikari's goons explains the ground rules. There's no running away from a fight and absolutely no usage of curse techniques is allowed. Yuji boldly tells the guy that he doesn't mind if his opponents use their powers, since he's not afraid of anyone. But the henchman explains that since the audience consists of non-sorcerers, they can't actually see cursed techniques, making a hidden battle boring to watch. At the end of the day, this is a business, and in the world of entertainment, the spectators are treated like royalty. The subordinate also informs Yuji that there are two categories of matches: raw, unscripted brawls, and matches with a script written by the boss himself. He hints that if Yuji puts on a good enough show, the boss might actually be interested in having a chat with him. When he reaches the arena, Yuji is shocked to see they've literally gutted the upper floors so the crowd can look down and watch the carnage below. The announcer Joe Bobby wastes no time introducing the rising young talent Yuji to the roaring crowd. Though when Bobby announces Yuji's opponent, the entire stadium erupts in noise while Yuji's jaw hits the floor in pure shock. His opponent is none other than Panda himself. Meanwhile, back in the control room, the man of the hour, Kinji Hikari, finally makes his full appearance. Contrary to what you might expect, Hikari has a very rugged, street-smart vibe, carrying himself with the unmistakable aura of a true underworld kingpin. Standing right beside him is a flashy individual with two-toned hair. However, let me give you a heads up before you get any ideas. This person's name is Kirara Hoshi, and he is definitely a guy. Don't let the looks fool you. It's pretty hilarious that a guy as tough-looking as Hikari has such specific tastes and companions. Right now, though, he's looking bored out of his mind because he thinks today's main event is a total dud. In his eyes, watching some random newcomer go up against a giant panda just doesn't have that spark of excitement he's looking for. Hikari is convinced that Panda is going to absolutely demolish the kid in seconds, which means there's no real gambling thrill to be had. Meanwhile, the match between Yuji and Panda kicks off, and it's honestly a bit of a comedy behind the scenes. To the cheering crowd, it looks like a high-stakes, intense battle between a martial arts panda and a promising rookie fighter. Even the commentator, who's only been on the job for 2 weeks, is getting hyped up by the action. But in reality, the two are just whispering to each other about Hikari while putting on a show. They are trading dozens of punches that look powerful, but the actual damage is zero. Panda quietly informs Yuji that he and Hikari are old acquaintances, which is why Hikari hasn't been suspicious of him yet. Hikari has been avoiding Panda lately, but since Yuji is hiding the fact that he's a student from Jujutsu High, they have a plan. Yuji throws a hilariously weak punch, and Panda intentionally takes the hit, rolling around on the ground and jokingly calling for the United Nations to step in. The audience absolutely loses it, shocked that an unknown rookie could actually take down the legendary fighting panda. That upset victory is exactly what it took to get Hikari's attention. He immediately calls for Yuji to meet him and starts writing a script for Yuji's final match. However, they aren't letting their guard down regarding Megumi. Hikari tells Kirara that he'll need to help with security. Hikari admits he hasn't felt this kind of rush since the time his ex-girlfriend maxed out every single one of his credit cards. Once the match is over, Panda finds Megumi in a secluded corner to talk. Panda is actually pretty impressed that Yuji managed to get an invite from Hikari so quickly, considering Panda has tried and failed multiple times. Panda explains that even though he knows Hikari is always in the rooftop monitoring room, he's never been able to get close to the entrance himself. Every time Panda tries to walk toward the door, the distance between him and the entrance never seems to shrink. It gave him a sensation very similar to Gojo-sensei's limitless technique. Panda suspects this is actually the work of Kirara's curse technique, as Kirara is a third year just like Hikari. To avoid making Hakari run away, Panda decided not to force his way in and instead stayed active in the fighting arena. Luckily, Megumi's team arrived just in time to help. However, Megumi is still a bit skeptical about whether Yuji can actually convince Hakari to help them once they meet face to face. While Yuji is incredibly sincere and likable, he is also notoriously terrible when it comes to telling even a simple lie, which makes him a bit of a wildcard in a high-stakes negotiation. If Yuji goes in there and Hakari starts grilling him with questions, there's a high chance he'll accidentally reveal their true identities, causing the whole negotiation to crumble. Hakari would likely just flee or call for reinforcements. Because of this risk, Panda suggests a daring strategy. Have Yuji play the role of the arena champion so he gets a formal invitation to Hakari's private office. While Yuji is inside, the rest of them will quietly neutralize the guards and take control of the area surrounding the monitoring room. Megumi expresses some doubt, asking how they'll pull that off if Hakari is literally watching the security feed. It turns out that Panda has already memorized the locations of every single camera and figured out all their blind spots. With that information, Megumi finally sees a path to success. Their main objective is to completely isolate Hakari and Kurara from the rest of their crew. Once Yuji is inside the room and there's no one left outside for Hakari to call for backup, they'll have him cornered. They want to force Hakari into a position where he has no choice but to sit down and listen to their proposal. The goal is to get him to cooperate rather than just bolting for the exit. Panda points out that the biggest hurdle will be Kurara's curse technique. If his power allows him to teleport Yuji out of the room or bring allies in, then Megumi's group might as well give up on negotiating entirely. With the time and place set, Yuji arrives at the designated spot and is met by Kurara, who prepares to lead him to the boss. Kurara acts quite friendly, though he's clearly sizing Yuji up, expressing surprise that a mere high school freshman could be this skilled. Yuji notices Kurara's demeanor and asks if he's always this happy. Kurara explains that since Hakari is currently in a great mood, he's happy too, confessing that he truly loves being by Hakari's side. Their conversation serves as a prelude to the main meeting. The meeting between Hakari and Yuji is far from a simple greeting. It feels more like Hakari is trying to weave a spell over him. He makes it clear that he couldn't care less about justice or saving the world. For him, the only thing that matters is the rush of excitement. According to Hakari, gambling isn't just about the money. It's the very essence of living. He believes society just steps on anyone who isn't brave enough to place a massive bet on their own life. He views love as a form of total control, and his dream is to control the collective excitement of the entire nation through his underground arena. In the wake of the Shibuya incident, the existence of cursed spirits has been exposed to the general public, and the old laws of the jiu-jitsu world are crumbling. Hakari sees this chaos as the perfect opportunity to make his move. He wants to take advantage of this turning point to bring his fighting arena into the light, transforming it into a fully legal and public competition. Hakari believes he's already holding a winning hand, especially with powerful assets like Yuji now in the mix. Suddenly, a phone call interrupts their talk. Hakari offers Yuji a drink to celebrate, but Yuji politely declines, mentioning that he's not old enough to drink yet. Yuji sticks to his guns about being underage, and Hakari casually mentions that even a legend like Satoru Gojo can handle his liquor. Yuji tries to play it cool, pretending he has no clue who this Gojo guy is, but he inadvertently walks straight into Hakari's trap. Hakari knows the jiu-jitsu world better than that and isn't so easily fooled. Hakari looks him dead in the eye and tells him that there isn't a single jujutsu sorcerer on the planet who doesn't know exactly who Gojo is. He catches him in the lie instantly, realizing that Yuji has been playing him from the start. What a wild ride it's been seeing, Maki's evolution and the tragic fate of Director Yaga. This massive cliffhanger with Hakari and Itadori has everyone on the edge of their seats, wondering what happens next, my friend. Things are really heating up as the countdown to the culling game continues, and we're definitely moving into some of the most intense territory of the series yet. At the very start of the episode, we see a guard who's just hoping to finish his shift quickly and head back home. Unfortunately for him, Megumi shows up and instantly knocks him unconscious before he even knows what hit him. The team looks around trying to figure out why the atmosphere feels so weird, and then they spot Panda sitting there in his usual imposing way. Seeing him actually brings a wave of relief to everyone involved. It turns out Panda had already been involved in a skirmish at that location earlier. While everyone was distracted by the fallout of that fight, the guards were dealt with, and now Panda and Megumi are beginning to make their way further up into the building to find their target. Megumi wonders if they're finally done with the trouble, suggesting they should probably lock the doors to keep things secure. But as they move forward, they suddenly come face to face with Kurara. The moment they lock eyes, Kira realizes that these intruders aren't just random people. Kurara recognizes Panda and the spiky-haired boy standing next to him, which immediately confirms all her suspicions. She remembers seeing this boy with Yuji Itadori in the past. Realizing that Panda is helping Fushiguro, she concludes that Yuji and the rest of them must definitely be agents sent from Jujutsu High. Just as a phone call comes through, Kurara tries to make a run for it. Megumi reacts instantly by summoning his divine dog to block her path, but in a strange twist, the attack is reflected away. Panda points out that he's experienced this before every single time he tries to get close. A weird force pushes him back. Kurara starts sprinting away the moment she sees Panda approaching. Panda is desperately trying to explain that they aren't enemies and that they only came there to talk. But Kurara feels betrayed, shouting that she placed her trust in Panda and can't believe he would turn around and deceive her like this. Kurara notes that because Panda is already marked by her technique, he isn't a threat to her movement. She heads straight for Hikari's room, but Megumi's divine dog cuts her off. Now she's trapped, she can't move forward or backward because both the dog and Panda have these mysterious markings on them. The marking is also on the divine dog, and Megumi is completely stumped by how this weird technique actually functions. He tries to reason with Kurara, asking her to listen because she must know the terrible state Tokyo is in right now. He emphasizes that something horrific has happened to the city and they need help. He explains that in these dire times they absolutely need Hikari's assistance. He swears they aren't representing the interests of Jujutsu High, but Kurara scoffs at the idea. She reminds him that it was the school and its people who were the ones to first cut ties and abandon their connection to her and Hikari. Megumi is still a bit lost regarding the specific beef between Kurara, Hikari, and the school system. Panda takes a moment to explain that the whole conflict started because of a massive clash with the conservative faction. They had a huge disagreement in the past that led to this long-standing and bitter rivalry. The primary cause of the clash was their specific style of jujutsu. For instance, someone like Nobara has a very traditional and proper technique that the elders accept. However, Hikari's technique is entirely different and modern, incorporating things that look like old cursed video trends and digital concepts. Hikari's curse technique is a mix of high-tech modern themes, which the higher-ups in the conservative faction simply refuse to acknowledge as legitimate. Those old-fashioned leaders acted quite irrationally regarding his power, and that fundamental disagreement is exactly why the two sides ended up clashing so violently. Kurara questions their presence, pointing out that if they have someone as powerful as Satoru Gojo around to handle things, they shouldn't even need Hikari's help. She suspects that there's a hidden motive for them being there, as it makes no sense for them to come seeking reinforcements if everything was going fine. Megumi finally drops the truth. Satoru Gojo has already been sealed away. Kurara is visibly shocked by this revelation, but still seems hesitant to believe it. Megumi realizes that just talking won't be enough to convince her or get them through, so he decides it's time to take more direct action to change the situation. Megumi activates his rabbit escape technique, summoning a swarm of Shikigami. As the rabbits fill the space, he notices something very interesting. Every single rabbit now carries a specific marking or symbol. He even spots the same symbols appearing on the walls and objects around the room. As more rabbits swarm out, Kurara wonders what Megumi is up to. She thinks to herself that since these are all Shikigami made of energy, and her technique marks a person's energy, these rabbits are essentially being treated by her technique as if they were individual cursed energy users themselves. She believes Megumi will be crushed by the sheer volume of his own energy being marked, but as the rabbits multiply, they suddenly start to vanish and dissipate into thin air. It's because of the specific way Kurara's technique works. Megumi finally starts to understand the logic, realizing he also carries a mark just like the rabbits. When he checks with Panda, he finds that Panda is marked too, though the symbols are different. Megumi realizes the symbols aren't random at all. They represent a constellation. This celestial map is the key trick to the entire technique, and Kurara begins to worry that her secret is being unraveled. Kurara is stunned that Megumi might have figured it out so soon. When Megumi confidently states that the pattern is the Southern Cross constellation, Kurara is visibly shaken. She gets angry with herself for having a reaction that basically confirmed Megumi was correct, even though he didn't have absolute proof yet. Megumi didn't have 100% proof until Kurara showed her surprise, but now it's confirmed. Megumi actually knows about the Southern Cross constellation because of his sister. He explains that the constellation is made of 4 main stars, and the technique is clearly governed by the positioning of those specific celestial bodies. Based on the constellation's rules, certain people can get close, while others are forced away. Currently, Panda and Megumi are being blocked from approaching specific points because those stars are programmed to repel each other. Kurara and the door are linked, while Megumi and Panda are stuck in a different part of the sequence. It's a situation where A can get close to B, but B is physically pushed away from A. They are desperately looking for a workaround, knowing that if Kurara makes it to the door, it'll be impossible to get inside. They keep brainstorming a way to bypass this invisible barrier while there's still time. Megumi starts to suspect there might even be a 5th star hidden in this sequence. Panda is worried that if there are 6 or 7 stars, the complexity will be overwhelming. However, they hope it's not that many. Kirara is currently guarding the area fiercely to ensure that absolutely no one can slip through her defense. As they try to find an opening to slip inside, Kirara suddenly marks a nearby car. It turns out the car's marking matches the one on Panda, causing Panda to be physically dragged and attached to the vehicle. Fushiguro is still free though, and he continues his dash toward the location of the 5th star. Megumi calls out to Panda while he focuses on his goal. He notices that the same repelling and attracting force that affected the divine dog is now happening to him and Panda. No matter how much they try to pull away, they keep getting pulled back, and Megumi is finally starting to fully grasp the mechanics of this technique. Megumi realizes that Kirara doesn't actually have to touch a person to place a star on them. Since she never touched him or the rabbits, it means her technique is designed to mark the person's cursed energy directly. This is what makes her ability so tricky to defend against since contact isn't necessary. The real question is how she marked the car, since cars don't have cursed energy. Megumi realizes she must have infused the car with her own energy first. As he scouts the area, he finally spots the 5th star and realizes that Kura is using her own energy signatures to set up these spatial markers to block them. Megumi realizes that if he can just touch that 5th star, he'll be able to bypass the repulsion and reach the door. It's the specific logic of the technique. However, just as he's about to make his move and reach for the star, Kirara suddenly appears to cut him off and prevent him from completing his plan. Kirara admits she never expected Megumi to decipher her technique with such precision, but she refuses to let him win. However, she makes a mistake by ignoring Panda. Panda uses one of the remaining rabbits and throws it, creating a disruption that finally causes the entire constellation technique to break apart. The constellation might look like a flat map, but it actually has incredible spatial depth. Kirara is absolutely furious that her complex defense was dismantled. She yells at them, asking if they really think they can just ignore her and her power by throwing simple objects around like it's nothing. Megumi had been waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Within 10 seconds of the technique failing, he has the divine dog pounce on Kirara. His patience finally pays off, as everything was timed perfectly to cross the invisible line and force Kirara into a corner where she can no longer resist. Megumi finally manages to restrain Kirara. Kirara mentions that if the divine dog hadn't been pulled in, Megumi might never have figured out the secret. He finally explains the core rule. The technique causes objects or people with the highest levels of cursed energy to be magnetically attracted to one another according to the stars. Megumi had noticed this energy attraction earlier. Kirara is genuinely impressed, asking if Megumi is really just a first-year student because his tactical knowledge is way beyond his age. Megumi, however, drops the attitude and literally begs Kirara to just listen to what they have to say. And right at that moment, Yuji comes flying through the air as Hikari makes his grand entrance. Hikari immediately starts delivering brutal hits. He tells Yuji he'll only listen after he sees how much of a beating Yuji can take, leaving Yuji with no choice but to absorb the blows. This isn't a measured fight like the ones in Shibuya. Hikari is throwing punches intended to break bones and faces. Even Kirara feels bad watching it and asks Hikari to listen. Yuji tries to explain that his seniors told him Hikari is the strongest person around, and that they desperately need his power. Hikari laughs and asks if Yuji is really ready to put his life on the line just for a favor. He questions if Yuji is truly prepared for the risk and mocks Principal Yaga, wondering out loud why such an old man would bother training someone who seems like a total loser in his eyes. Yuji responds with an intense resolve, saying he's just a cog in the machine built to destroy cursed energy. This answer makes Hikari even more furious, and he delivers a massive punch that sends Yuji flying through the air. Megumi screams in panic as he watches Yuji get knocked back a huge distance. Hikari assumes the fight is over and starts to walk away, but he is stunned when Yuji suddenly appears right behind him, standing firm. Hikari can't believe Yuji is still alive and conscious after taking so many direct, heavy punches that should have put anyone else down for good. Yuji reiterates that he is a cog whose only purpose is to exercise curses, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to achieve that. He even tells Hikari he's ready to play along with any of his games. Seeing this raw passion and dedication, Hikari finally starts to see Yuji's true worth and determination. Hikari realizes how passionate Yuji is and finally agrees to help them out. Even though he hates the Jujutsu High establishment, he can't turn his back on someone showing that much heart. As they talk, they find out that a brand new rule, Rule Number 9, has just been added to the ongoing game. Rule 9 allows players to see the names, points, and current colony locations of all other participants in the game. This significant rule change was initiated by a powerful person named Hajime Kashimo. Kashimo is currently in a state of deep depression because of how things are playing out. Kashimo complains that modern sorcerers are incredibly weak compared to the warriors of 400 years ago. He is searching for Sukuna and feeling frustrated by the lack of a challenge. Having already amassed 200 points, he uses them to add the rule that reveals everyone's information and location across the colonies. Kashimo, who is an ancient sorcerer reincarnated into the present, is the one who opened up all player information. The episode ends on this chilling note, but he isn't the only threat out there. There's also another mysterious individual lawyer who has entered the culling game and is making waves. This lawyer seems to have some sort of mysterious link to Sukuna as well. We'll have to wait for the next chapter to uncover exactly who he is and what his true intentions are. It's a massive cliffhanger that sets the stage for even more chaos as the story continues to unfold in the next installment. Moving into episode 7, Kenjaku's massive barrier has officially solidified. But surprisingly, he isn't actually looking to wipe everyone out immediately. By utilizing his cursed techniques through the barrier, Kenjaku is able to enter that strange, liminal space that exists right between the dreams and the reality of every single person caught inside the barrier, so he can have a little chat with them. Kenjaku informs the residents that he is the one responsible for creating this barrier, and unfortunately, the places where they live have been forced to become the brutal battlegrounds for the culling game. Because Kenjaku put an immense amount of effort into constructing this barrier, the specific rules he has established are actually quite limited and he is unable to simply create completely nonsensical or impossible laws on a whim. However, there is one thing Kenjaku can do for the innocent people who are accidentally dragged into this mess. Anyone currently inside the barrier is permitted to leave exactly once. They are given the ultimate choice to either stay behind and risk death or step outside and keep on living. If they decide they want to leave, Kenjaku will personally escort them out once they regain consciousness. The reason Kenjaku has to move them is that, on the outside, the cursed spirits have already begun their grim work. While he is leading a young boy out, Kenjaku suddenly thanks the kid for being a friend to his son. Hearing that mention, I'm sure you guys already have a pretty good idea of exactly who he's referring to, right? Suddenly, the sound of someone calling out to Sasaki wakes the young man up. By this point, he has already been moved outside of the barrier. There are a ton of people gathered around, all of whom were taken out by Kenjaku just as they had requested. Every single person there confirms the same story. They were brought to that location by a man with long hair wearing traditional monk's robes. Sasaki asks his friend if the monk mentioned anything about his son to him as well. As it turns out, Kenjaku only shared that detail with Sasaki. Immediately, the image of Itadori Yuji pops into his head. Once all the misunderstandings are finally cleared up, the entire group sits down to have a serious talk. Hakari's jaw absolutely drops when he learns that Gojo Satoru has actually been sealed away. To make matters worse, Panda informs them that the principal has passed away, which causes a thick, gloomy atmosphere to hang over everyone. Yuji starts blaming himself, thinking the man died because of the catastrophe Sukuna caused during his rampage. However, Panda pulls him aside to tell him the truth. The principal died in combat against Principal Gakuganji, acting under orders from the higher-ups. Hakari clutches his head in total shock, realizing that almost every teacher who used to look after him is now in serious trouble or gone. Because of this, Hakari decides he's going to help Yuji's group deal with the culling game. But look here, you guys, don't go getting the wrong idea. I'm not doing any of this for free. This is a strict business deal, you understand. If I step in and help you out now, once everything is finally settled, you're going to have to return the favor and help me out with my own objectives. Alright, it turns out Hakari wants their help with overhauling the current jiu-jitsu regulations. Megumi decides to leverage his new status as the head of the Zenin clan, informing Hakari of his position and promising that he'll make the legal changes happen, no matter how difficult it proves to be. Hakari is hit with one surprise after another, but he realizes that with the backing of one of the big free families, those amendments are actually quite achievable. Even though he's still a little worried about the Zenin family trying to take over his underground arena, he figures it's best to stay on good terms with the young clan leader for now. Come here, buddy. I love you. But the poor guy has no idea that the Zenin clan has been decimated, and only Maki and Megumi are left. If he finds that out, he's going to be even more traumatized. Suddenly, a Kogani manager Shikigami appears, shouting at the top of its lungs. It announces some sensational news. Someone has already added a brand new rule to the game, which means that all the private information of other players will now be fully exposed, including their names, their current point totals, and any rules they have added to the current barrier. Man, whoever came up with that rule is really playing for keeps. However, Megumi is genuinely confused about why Yuji is already listed as a registered participant. In reality, you only become a player if you have either received the technique or accepted a cursed object directly from Kenjaku. For anyone else, regardless of their strength, They only officially become a player once they physically step inside a barrier. Yuji immediately recalls Kenjaku mentioning that he had established binding vows with countless sorcerers dating back over 1,000 years. This makes Yuji consider the possibility that Kenjaku must have made some kind of pact with Sukuna in the distant past. As a result, Yuji has indirectly become a participant through Sukuna's involvement. Even though Megumi still has plenty of questions, time is of the essence, so he as Yuji take advantage of Rule 9 to summon Kogani and demand specific information regarding the players who are currently participating in the culling game. Instantly, they receive a full breakdown of all the players and the identity of the person who just added that new rule. Megumi wastes no time and tells Kogani to filter the list for any guys who have more than 100 points. Kogani smartly replies that it's only synchronized with Yuji, not with Megumi. Megumi gets a bit irritated and looks ready to swing at the thing, but Yuji steps in to calm him down, telling Kogani to just shut its mouth and get on with the task. So, the little guy pulls up the records of everyone with over 100 points for the boys to check out. As Megumi looks over the names, he notices several sorcerers who have been reincarnated through contracts with Kenjaku, and you can be sure every single one of them has their own hidden motives. However, in order to get enough points to add the rules needed to save Tsumiki, Megumi's group would normally be forced to take out a significant number of people. That's why Megumi comes up with a better plan. They'll hunt down the guys who already have over 100 points, beat them into submission, and force them to use those points to create the new rules for the group. That would work perfectly. Looking through the list Kogani provided, they get lucky and find a guy named Higuruma Hiromi, who has 102 points and hasn't added any rules yet. Now they have a solid strategy. Megumi starts laying out the plan for everyone by focusing on how to exploit Rule 8. This rule dictates that players must change their point totals at least once every 19 days, or they'll have their curse techniques stripped away, which is basically a death sentence. But if they can introduce a new rule that allows players to transfer points to each other, Rule 8 becomes completely irrelevant since points can just be rotated around. Still, the most ideal option in Megumi's mind would be adding a rule that allows a player to spend points to officially exit the game forever. Hikari, however, is skeptical, thinking that such a change might violate the game's core logic and disrupt its overall maintenance. Megumi is well aware of that, but he figures that if they add a condition requiring the player to find a substitute to take their place before they can leave, the rule will likely be approved. Even with all this, their absolute #1 priority is still finding the angel to rescue their teacher Gojo because that's their only real path to a guaranteed victory. The entire group settles on targeting Higuruma Hamai and Kashimo Hajime as their primary prey. Following that, Yuji tries to look up any information he can find on the angel, but there's absolutely nothing available. Surprisingly though, he discovers a player named Taninaka who has an insane total of 500 points. Panda suggests that Angel might not actually be the person's real name. After analyzing the layout and splitting the team, Hikari chooses to head to the second barrier to track down Hajime, while Panda and the duo of Yuji and Megumi take on the first Tokyo barrier to search for the angel. Kirara, meanwhile, will stay outside the barrier and wait for them to return. The reality is that Hikari wants someone stationed on the outside so they can maintain a line of communication with Maki or Yuta if needed. During this time, Yuji suggests that it might be better if he and Megumi split up, mostly because Yuji is worried that Sukuna is brewing some kind of dark scheme regarding Megumi, but Megumi absolutely refuses to go along with that. Honestly, Yuji is being quite thoughtful and protective here. It's a nice gesture. By the next day, everyone has officially accepted the binding agreement with the Kogani manager to become active players. Waiting for them on the inside is a wide variety of threats, including ancient sorcerers who have been reincarnated from over 1,000 years ago. Yuji is pretty confused by it all. So, Megumi gives him a brief rundown on the last few centuries of Jujutsu history, but honestly, it doesn't matter much. Whoever they run into is getting hit with a black flash anyway, so the history lesson is just background noise. As the two of them enter the barrier, they are immediately warped to one of 9 random locations within the zone. This little teleportation trick was never mentioned in the official rules, but that's just the reality inside the barrier. At every single drop point, there are enemies already lying in wait to ambush newcomers. Yuji is instantly attacked by an opponent using a rocket-like headbutt move. However, his insane physical toughness is so high that she quickly starts to realize that things are getting difficult. Yuji just casually tosses her aside with one hand, and she goes spinning away instantly. Her partner immediately charges in to hold Yuji accountable for his actions. Meanwhile, Megumi is having his own problems with a girl sitting in the middle of the road, crying and threatening to tell her mom because she's scared of his dogs, which is giving Megumi a massive headache. On the other hand, there's a blonde guy who actually recognizes Itadori the moment he enters the barrier. After Yuji finishes dealing with that girl, a guy with propeller shows up to challenge him. This Haba fellow keeps using his propeller to stay close and pressure Yuji. However, Yuji's constant movement and incredible athleticism are making Haba very frustrated, making him wish he had even more gadgets at his disposal. Yuji uses his speed to slip past the rotating blades and attack from behind, but Haba quickly shifts the air and counterattacks, pushing Yuji back. The two of them end up in a fierce aerial struggle. After that, Yuji delivers a solid kick to Haba's face and ducks into a nearby building to neutralize the flight advantage of that head propeller. But Haba apparently has an enlarging light because he makes his fan massive and slices right through the building. However, he leaves a huge opening by charging in head first. What a massive blunder. Yuji is ready to capitalizing on it. He lands a punch as explosive as a rocket. A strike so powerful it completely shatters the guy's fan. Yuji decides to give him a couple of hits to the family jewels to take back for Hikari. Even with his incredible strength, even Yuji's own hand is feeling the impact after that punch. Moving back to Megumi, he's already knocked that crying girl out. He tells her to stop the nonsense and tell him everything she knows about Hiruma Hiromi. She tries to be stubborn, but Megumi is even tougher, eventually forcing her to spill what she knows. However, in exchange, she demands that Megumi do something for her, like acting as her personal knight or something equally ridiculous. Megumi agrees immediately just to save time, but he makes it clear that this only applies if she's telling the truth. If not, he has no problem taking her out. Megumi is far more cold-blooded than Yuji. He's perfectly willing to earn 100 points himself by turning his opponents into gold rather than hesitating the way Yuji might. Meanwhile, Nobita is completely passed out after Yuji's little gift. While Yuji is trying to find out more about Higuruma, another guy shows up and recognizes him. Even though Yuji doesn't have a clue who this person is, as soon as he hears the guy call him the Tiger of Nishinaka, Yuji assumes they must be from the same neck of the woods. Without missing a beat, the guy starts leading Yuji toward Higuruma as if it's the most natural thing in the world. The guy introduces himself as Amai and admits he's just a low-level lackey for those guys. At the same time, that girl is leading Megumi on his own hunt. Things are starting to feel a bit suspicious, so Megumi asks her where she's actually taking him. She just tells him to keep quiet and keep following her. After a fair bit of back and forth, both of their guides finally provide an answer about Higuruma's whereabouts, but the locations they give are completely different from each other. It's pretty obvious at this point that both of these people are just trying to pull a fast one on them. Welcome to episode 8, where the plot really starts to thicken. After Megumi manages to squeeze some vital information out of the girl he just met regarding Higuruma's whereabouts in Shinjuku, things take a weird turn. Instead of heading straight there, she starts insisting on taking a massive detour for some reason. This specific route happens to cut right through Agibakuro, which just so happens to be the very same location that Yuji's old acquaintance Amai had brought up before. As it turns out, this guy Amai wasn't exactly a saint back in his younger years. In his high school days, Amai was known as a top-tier delinquent who constantly hung around with troublemakers just to pick on defenseless students. But one day, while they were right in the middle of their usual bullying routine, Yuji Itadori suddenly stepped onto the scene and told the whole group to pack it up and stop. The entire gang turned around and scoffed when they realized Yuji was just a puny middle schooler, so they immediately decided to swarm him. However, Yuji didn't even break a sweat. He threw a single effortless punch that sent one of those punks flying. That first guy's face was left in a total mess after that hit. Seeing their buddy go down, another delinquent grabbed a metal pipe and tried to get some revenge for his fallen comrade. But Yuji dodged the strike as smoothly as taffy, before unleashing a kick that floored two more of them instantly. From that day forward, Amai could never forget the face of the legendary Yuji Itadori in his neighborhood. Now, switching back to Megumi, he's staying incredibly sharp because he can already tell that something is starting to smell very fishy about their current situation. Megumi knows that because Ikebukuro has such a high concentration of resources, it's naturally going to be a hotspot where various players are bound to clash and kill each other. Despite his concerns, the girl tries to smooth things over by offering two main reasons to convince the young head of the Zenin clan. First, she argues that this specific route is actually much more convenient for their travel. Second, she mentions that the path just happens to pass right by her own apartment, making it a logical choice for a quick stop along the way. She brazenly asks Megumi if he could let her stop at home just to take a quick shower. She even goes as far as to flirtatiously suggest that if a handsome guy like him is interested in some physical entertainment, she'd be more than happy to oblige. Meanwhile, shifting our focus back to Yuji, his old acquaintance leads him toward a local theater, claiming that it's the primary base for Higuruma. Without a single shred of suspicion, Yuji immediately charges straight inside, leaving his friends standing there in utter shock at how reckless he is. The friend is clearly drowning in guilt regarding Yuji and seems to have something important to say, but he just can't bring himself to speak up, only watching Yuji walk away while silently whispering an apology to the air. While Yuji is busy making his entrance into the theater, Megumi arrives at the girl's place for what was supposed to be a quick visit. However, things take a dark turn when he encounters a man named Reggie waiting there. It becomes instantly clear that Reggie views Megumi not as a guest, but as his next prime target for the hunt. Realizing he's been completely played, Megumi shoots a deadly glare at the girl who led him into this trap. But with Reggie standing by her side, she doesn't seem intimidated by Megumi at all, since Reggie is an incredibly powerful sorcerer. Megumi is absolutely furious about the betrayal, though. He coldly tells her to shut her mouth and stay quiet, warning her that once he's finished taking out this dog, Reggie, he's going to deal with her next in a way she definitely won't enjoy. Meanwhile, over at the theater, Yuji comes face to face with a man who is casually lounging in a bathtub, as if he doesn't have a care in the world. Neither of them has ever met before, but the man starts giving Yuji some bizarre advice, suggesting that bathing with all your clothes on is actually way more refreshing than doing it normally. Yuji is just like, yeah, no thanks, I'm not into that weird stuff. The man then goes on a rant, complaining about being a 30-year-old guy who has lived his entire life without ever once breaking a single law. Because he's been weighed down by so many responsibilities lately, he feels the need to challenge himself by doing something he considers fundamentally wrong. Yuji cuts to the chase and asks him if he's the one named Higuruma, and luckily it turns out he is. So, at least Yuji's friend wasn't lying to him after all, unlike the situation Megumi found himself in with that girl, who completely led him into an ambush for her own gain. Yuji tries to initiate a serious conversation with Higuruma, but the guy just hits him with a lawyer's fee, saying his legal consultation costs 5,000 yen for every 30 minutes. Yuji is completely taken aback by this. It's shocking because Higuruma is supposed to be someone who just recently awakened to his powers within the game. He's already managed to rack up a massive total of 100 points. This is clear proof that he's incredibly dangerous and powerful. But since he's still a modern human, Yuji hopes he might be willing to listen to reason. Yuji gets straight to the point, explaining that their group's main goal is to bring the culling game to an end as quickly as possible. To achieve that monumental task, they are going to need a specific resource. They desperately need Higuruma's 100 points so they can introduce a new rule into the game's mechanics. However, Higuruma is brutally honest with his response. It's a hard no. At first, Yuji thinks he might just be joking around, but he quickly realizes Higuruma is dead serious. He refuses to help because he actually finds value in this deadly survival game for his own personal reasons. In Higuruma's eyes, the current state of the world is exactly what he needs. He believes that within the confines of this game, traditional human laws have become completely useless, and the only things that truly matter are the game's literal rules. Furthermore, the power he has gained is undeniably real. As a professional lawyer, Higuruma had grown utterly exhausted by endless litigation and moral debates in the real world. Ever since he entered the culling game, he has felt a newfound sense of freedom and comfort. Here, there are no complex lawsuits to worry about anymore. In this environment, there's no subjective right or wrong. Anyone who breaks the established rules of the game simply gets punished, and that's the end of it. Higuruma is actually curious to see where these barriers in the game itself will eventually lead, so he has no desire to see it stop. Yuji tries to argue that the culling game is actually a dangerous ritual, and if it's allowed to continue, every single person in Japan could end up dead. But Higuruma doesn't buy it for a second. He thinks Yuji is just blowing smoke and making things up to get what he wants, firmly believing the game isn't going to end anytime soon. Since their conversation has reached a total stalemate, Yuji decides to change his tactics and prepare his fist to force Higuruma into giving up those 100 points. But Higuruma isn't intimidated in the slightest. He slowly steps out of the bathtub and asks Yuji if he has ever reached the point where he wanted to kill someone out of pure rage. He describes that feeling of total frustration quite vividly. Even though Yuji was the one who initiated the confrontation, he doesn't just blindly rush in without a plan. He knows that Higuruma possessing 100 points is a grim statistic, proving that roughly 20 other sorcerers have already met their demise at the hands of this man. He's clearly not someone to be taken lightly in a physical fight. Higuruma doesn't waste any more breath on words. He suddenly manifests a gavel and a Shikigami appears right behind him. He immediately activates his domain expansion known as Deadly Sentencing. Meanwhile, in another location, Reggie is becoming increasingly fascinated by Megumi because of his obvious strength. He starts questioning Megumi to see exactly how much the boy understands about the true nature of the culling game ritual. Megumi explains his theory that the game is a ritual designed to harvest cursed energy from everyone involved to transform the entire population of Japan into something inhuman. In response to this, Reggie asks if Megumi is even aware of who Kenjaku is. He then proceeds to completely shoot down Megumi's theory about the player's cursed energy being the main goal. It seems like Kenjaku's master plan is far more complex than Megumi originally calculated. Reggie suggests there's a much deeper scheme at play here. He points out 3 specific inconsistencies regarding the number of players, the massive power gaps, and the barrier rules. For instance, if you have 1,000 players divided among 10 barriers, each would start with 100 people. However, in every barrier, you have absolute monsters like Kashimo and Higuruma who just go around wiping out everyone else in sight. For powerhouses like them, slaughtering dozens of other sorcerers is as easy as breathing. This means that from the very beginning, the strongest sorcerers were guaranteed to dominate their respective barriers. Furthermore, new players are teleported into the game completely at random, and quite a few of them die the moment they land. If Kenjaku's goal was truly to maximize cursed energy, he would need to keep as many players alive as possible for as long as possible. The way things are set up currently just doesn't make sense if energy collection is the only goal. Based on these clues, Reggie speculates that once only the strongest handful of players remain, Kenjaku will drop some kind of bomb on the game, ending the culling game once its secret purpose is fulfilled. At that exact moment, we see Kenjaku being formally invited to meet with a high-ranking council. It turns out his true intentions are far deeper than anyone realized. The conspiracy is reaching levels nobody could have imagined. Returning to the Theater of Dreams, Yuji gears up for his high-stakes confrontation with Higuruma. To understand who he's up against, we need to look at Higuruma's past. He was actually a very kind-hearted lawyer who specialized in taking on nearly impossible cases to help those who were truly struggling in the justice system. Recently, his law firm took on a case involving a robbery and murder. During the interrogation process, Higuruma heard a desperate plea of innocence from a man named Okajima. On the surface, the case looked like a total shutout because all the physical evidence pointed right at him. They found the murder weapon, a knife, and the DNA from the bloodstains matched perfectly. Despite all that incriminating evidence against his client, Higuruma refused to give up and kept digging for more information, discovering that Okajima had actually been a victim of a false interrogation in the past as well. As for the knife, Okajima claimed he had simply found it and intended to turn it over to the police, but he just forgot it was in his house. He explained that in the neighborhood where he lived, people were terrified of calling the police or ambulances because they didn't want to cause trouble for others. While those excuses sounded incredibly weak to most people, Higuruma found a fascinating detail about Okajima's extremely difficult life. The man worked for a non-profit organization but was never actually paid a proper salary, only receiving tiny amounts of gift money for food occasionally. Despite having almost no income, he still had to pay 50,000 yen in rent every single month. Higuruma's intuition told him that Okajima was actually an innocent man. He firmly believed Okajima was innocent, but being that kind-hearted in his profession was a fast track to starving to death. His assistant had tried to warn him countless times to stop taking on these hopeless cases that paid nothing and drained his energy. The Higuruma just couldn't help himself and kept doing it anyway. Even his former boss was completely fed up with his idealistic approach to the law. In a previous case, Higuruma worked tirelessly to get a driver's sentence reduced after an accident, but the man only showed him pure anger because he wasn't fully acquitted of all charges. Even so, young Higuruma remained incredibly passionate about his work. Eventually, he managed to pull off a miracle and got Okajima declared not guilty in court, but it was far too early to start celebrating because things were about to take a turn for the worse. The prosecution was obviously going to file an appeal immediately. Just as Higuruma feared, a second trial took place. Even though there wasn't a single shred of new evidence, the court completely reversed the decision and sentenced Okajima to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Okajima looked at Higuruma with such intense, resentful hatred that it sent a shock through his system. In that moment, the kind-hearted soul inside Higuruma began to crack. He realized that being punished for doing a good deed is an all-too-common reality in this world. However, Higuruma's true fury wasn't directed at his client, but at the corrupt judges and the entire court system. He realized that from the very beginning they had already decided to pin the crime on Okajima regardless of the actual truth or the evidence presented. All that bottled-up resentment and negative energy inside Higuruma finally reached its breaking point. He started slamming his gavel down like a madman, and suddenly, a Shikigami manifested behind him. That was the exact instant Higuruma awakened his curse technique and officially entered the culling game. In the 9th episode, Itadori Yuji immediately senses that the situation is going to get extremely difficult if he stays trapped inside the enemy's domain. He tries to end the fight instantly by landing a decisive punch, but he's just a second too late. Inside this peculiar domain, all acts of violence are strictly prohibited for everyone involved. Yuji finds himself forcibly worked back to his starting position, but now he is standing right in the center of the judicial dock. He's left wondering how on earth his opponent pulled this off. It turns out Higuruma is a total sorcery prodigy, who managed to master domain expansion in just 12 short days after awakening his powers. This isn't a lethal, guaranteed kill domain like the ones used by monsters like Sukuna or Gojo. Instead, it's a rule-based domain that operates on mandatory legal procedures, much like Hikari's technique. There is one supreme, absolute law within this space. Every single act of physical aggression is totally forbidden. Since physical violence is completely banned, neither Yuji nor Higuruma can land a single blow on one another. The conflict undergoes a dramatic shift into a completely different format. A battle of wits held within a supernatural courtroom. Higuruma begins to explain the divine laws at play here. The presiding judgment knows every dark secret about anyone who enters the domain. It has the power to select a specific transgression from the defendant's past to bring to light. This crime could range from the most trivial misdemeanor to the most horrific felony the person has ever committed. Interestingly, even Higuruma doesn't know which crime will be chosen. In this legal drama, Yuji takes on the role of the defendant while Higuruma acts as the prosecutor. Yuji is given 3 specific options for his defense. He can maintain total silence, offer a full confession, or attempt to deny the charges, which might even involve telling a lie to save himself. After the arguments are presented, the judge will hand down a final verdict. Higuruma signals for the judgment to begin the proceedings. Instantly, an indictment against Itadori Yuji is announced to the court. The charge states that on May 16, 2017, the defendant, Yuji Itadori, entered a red and black pachinko parlor, an adult gambling den filled with steel balls at a time when he was still underage. Because he was under 18 at the time, this was a clear violation of the law. Yuji starts sweating bullets as he realizes the situation is deadly serious and definitely not a game. A case file containing the evidence against Yuji appears in Higuruma's hands. Although it doesn't provide an absolute guarantee of his guilt, Yuji's task is simple yet daunting. He must present a convincing defense for himself to earn an acquittal and be declared innocent by the judge. Yuji is incredibly nervous because this entire curse technique is centered around a courtroom, and he's facing an actual professional lawyer. How is he supposed to win a legal debate? He thinks back to Master Tengen's words about how domains have always been the gold standard for sorcerers, both in ancient times and the present. However, modern domain expansions have evolved to focus almost exclusively on guaranteed hit and guaranteed kill mechanics. In the past, many domains actually skipped the guaranteed kill factor in favor of specialized rules. Because modern domains insist on being lethal, the conditions to manifest them have become far more complex, making them a high-level technique that very few can actually master. Returning to the trial, Higuruma prompts Yuji to present his case. However, there's a catch. They are each restricted to a very limited number of statements. Both sides only get one chance to speak their piece. Once Yuji provides his defense, Higuruma gets exactly one opportunity to offer a rebuttal. After that, the judge will render a verdict based on 6 specific governing laws. Yuji tries to ask what the penalty for a guilty verdict would be, but Higuruma refuses to give him a straight answer. Pressing further, Yuji asks another crucial question. Yuji asks, "Wait, am I actually allowed to lie?" Higuruma responds by saying that of course he can, noting that if everyone just told the truth, there wouldn't be much point to having a trial in the first place. Hearing this, Yuji strokes his chin as he tries to formulate a defense. He knows he actually went into that shop and even walked away with some winnings, which was pretty great at the time, but he can't exactly admit to that in open court. After considering his options, Yuji presents his argument. He claims that while he did indeed step inside the pachinko parlor, it wasn't for the purpose of gambling. He argues that he only went inside to use the restroom, and simply entering a building shouldn't be considered a crime. It's a surprisingly clever and logical defense for him to make. However, Higuruma just gives him a confident smile, knowing how the trial works. In this mystical courtroom, Higuruma is given a specific piece of evidence by the judge to dismantle any weak points in the defendant's defense. To ensure a degree of fairness, Higuruma doesn't actually know what the evidence is until the trial is underway. He pulls a document out of an envelope and reads it aloud. It's a photograph that clearly shows the defendant, Itadori Yuji, standing right at the cash exchange counter. If he was only there to use the bathroom, then why on earth was he seen at the counter where people swapped their winnings for cash? Yuji is left completely speechless as his lie is exposed. It's just bad luck for the kid. He isn't exactly a mastermind to begin with, and now he's stuck in this dirty psychological trap. He can't help but feel that if Megumi were here instead, he might have actually had a chance of winning this argument. Yuji complains that this whole thing feels totally unfair, but Higuruma tells him he's just too naive. While gambling itself is a crime, the photograph only proves he was at a currency exchange counter, which law doesn't strictly regulate in that specific context. He points out that Yuji was only a suspect at that point, and he could have avoided the whole mess with a better strategy. Higuruma explains that all Yuji really had to do was flatly deny the accusation by saying he didn't even know which shop they were talking about. It's easy for a high-powered lawyer to say that, but Yuji isn't exactly a legal expert who knows how to exploit those kinds of loopholes. The gap in their knowledge of the legal system is just too massive for Yuji to overcome on his own. Ultimately, the judgment delivers a guilty verdict, and the supernatural courtroom instantly dissolves, returning them to the original theater setting. Yuji finds it strange because even though he was convicted, he doesn't feel any physical change in his body. However, right at that moment, Higuruma hurls his gavel at him. Yuji manages to block it, but the lawyer closes the distance instantly, enlarging and reinforcing the hammer to strike him down. Yuji gets knocked flat on his face by the powerful blow. After taking that painful hit, he finally starts to realize that something is seriously wrong with his status. While the shifting size of the hammer is a problem, the real issue is that Yuji can no longer concentrate or use his cursed energy. Without giving Yuji a chance to recover, Higuruma praises his natural durability while continuing his relentless assault. He swings the gavel with his right hand, and even though Yuji dodges, Higuruma uses his cursed energy to manifest a second hammer in his left hand to follow through. Yuji is repeatedly knocked back by the force of the attacks. Higuruma is truly a legal genius who passed every single law exam on his very first attempt. Despite his intelligence, what's truly special is the latent sorcerer talent dwelling within him. Using his brilliant analytical mind, he spent his time researching and dissecting the mechanics of his own cursed technique after gaining his powers. He didn't just rely on raw strength, he used his intellect to master the spiritual energy flowing through him. He didn't even need much formal training. By simply observing how barriers are inverted, he taught himself how to master cursed energy control. Just 12 days after his awakening, Higuruma had already reached the level of a grade 1 sorcerer and realized his own domain expansion. Yuji has been caught and convicted in this domain, and Higuruma explains that when a target is punished, they lose the ability to use their technique. Since Yuji doesn't actually have an innate cursed technique, the punishment was shifted to confiscating his ability to use cursed energy entirely. However, Higuruma finds it absolutely terrifying that Yuji is still able to fight him on equal footing, even without any cursed energy to boost his stats. The lawyer realized that this young man's physical body and endurance are far beyond those of any normal human being. Higuruma probably has no clue that he's dealing with Kenjaku's favorite son. There's nothing normal about him. Deciding to stop holding back, Higuruma gets serious and vows to use his full power to crush Yuji. The two of them engage in a fierce battle as Higuruma demonstrates his ability to manifest and modify his gavel on the fly. Higuruma's fighting style is incredibly fluid, allowing him to dominate in both close quarters combat and at a distance, which makes things extremely difficult for Yuji. While Yuji tries to hide and look for an opening to strike back, Higuruma spots him immediately. He brings an entire iron structure crashing down, causing Yuji to fall. In a desperate move, Yuji kicks a bathtub toward his opponent. Higuruma shatters the bathtub with his hammer, sending shards and water flying everywhere to create a chaotic distraction for Yuji. Seizing the moment, Higuruma reinforces his hammer and brings it crashing down directly onto Yuji's head. Even though Yuji is incredibly tough, these repeated heavy blows are starting to take their toll. He knows he can't keep this up forever and needs to get his cursed energy back to survive. He needs to find a way to counter Higuruma's overwhelming pressure. Yuji racks his brains, searching for any possible loophole in the rules of the judicial cursed technique. He suddenly requests a second trial or retrial of sorts. Instantly, Higuruma's domain is reactivated, pulling them both back into the supernatural courtroom to face a new set of charges. Yuji is immediately hit with a much more serious accusation. This time, he is suspected of carrying out the mass massacre in Shibuya on October 31, 2018. Unlike his previous attempt to defend himself, Yuji confesses to the crime without a second thought. It's clear that the events of that night still haunt him deeply, and he carries a massive weight of guilt in his heart. He feels responsible for the tragedy, even though it was Sukuna who actually committed the acts using his body. The judgment immediately hands down the ultimate sentence, death for Itadori Yuji. The hammer in Higuruma's hand undergoes a transformation, becoming the executioner's sword. With the most serious crime on his record, Yuji has nothing left to lose but his life. And now his opponent has an even deadlier weapon. This new sword has a lethal potency that far exceeds any physical strike, and trying to block it with bare hands would be suicide. Higuruma is well aware that anyone struck by this blade is destined for the afterlife without exception. However, deep down, Higuruma starts to feel a strange sense of empathy toward Yuji. He begins to understand the flaws and struggles that the boy is dealing with. He sees that Yuji's shortcomings are similar to those of the victims and criminals a lawyer like him encounters every day. Everyone has a dark side and personal failures, no matter how noble their intentions might be. Higuruma tells Yuji that even if he tries to kindle a small flame to find some light, it won't be enough to drive away the overwhelming darkness that surrounds him. He warns that the darkness will eventually consume him from within. This perspective is why Higuruma previously refused to become a judge and preferred being a lawyer. He feared that if he were the one passing judgment, his own dark side might lead him to make terrible mistakes. But right now, things are different, and Higuruma claims he no longer cares about those moral dilemmas. He believes he has the right to decide who lives or dies simply because he has the power to enforce it. Yuji knows that charging in without any cursed energy is a certain death sentence. To buy some time, he kicks several rows of theater seats into the air, creating a visual distraction and a blind spot that allows him to maneuver. To add to the confusion, Yuji hurls his jacket to bait Higuruma's attention while he circles around from another direction to deliver a finishing strike. Higuruma suddenly hesitates, his mind flashing back to the moment Yuji confessed to the crimes without any hesitation or attempt to hide the truth. It was a rare moment where Higuruma didn't see a shred of deceit or soul-deep filth in a person, and he found that to be something truly worth treasuring. It turns out that Higuruma actually has the ability to see the evidence inside the case files beforehand. He's genuinely shocked that Yuji took the blame when the evidence clearly showed that Sukuna had forcibly taken over his body to commit those acts. Legally speaking, Yuji was completely innocent of those charges. At that exact moment, a massive punch from Yuji connects, sending Higuruma flying across the room. While lying on the ground, the lawyer cites Article 39 of the Penal Code, explaining that Yuji isn't guilty because he lacked any conscious awareness or control over his actions at the time. Furthermore, the fact that Yuji fought so hard to regain control of his body only proves his innocence even more. Higuruma firmly declares him not guilty. Yuji is completely stunned, wondering how this random lawyer could possibly know so much about his struggle with Sukuna. However, those details don't seem to matter much in the heat of the moment. Yuji still blames himself, feeling that his own weakness is a crime in itself. He's also curious as to why Higuruma chose to deactivate his curse technique in the middle of their fight. It turns out that the lawyer managed to rediscover his original self and his values while battling Yuji. The two of them finally sit down together to talk. As Yuji puts his jacket back on, the conversation takes a more serious turn. Higuruma looks at Yuji and asks him if he has ever truly felt the desire to kill someone. Without any hesitation, Yuji simply looks back and says, "Yes, I have." While these two are chatting, Higuruma decides to give Yuji a hand by adding a new rule to the game. It's rule number 10. Which officially allows players to transfer their points to whoever they want. Of course, this point transfer has to be considered a specific modification of rule number 8. Fortunately, Kogane gives rule 10 the green light, and right after that, Higuruma hands Yuji a single point to get things moving. This means for the next 19 days, they won't have to stress about having their curse technique stripped away, as long as they don't change their score. Higuruma starts to walk away, and even though Yuji tries to get him to stay, the older man refuses, claiming that being around Yuji just makes him feel disgusted by his own actions. He reveals that his remaining 2 points actually came from taking out a judge and a prosecutor during a previous trial. Because of that guilt, he plans to turn himself in the moment this whole game finally wraps up. Switching gears back to Megumi's situation. Reggie is still over there trying to wrap his head around Kenjaku's true intentions and future moves. However, the logic is so convoluted that it's nearly impossible to predict. That's why Reggie is focused on recruiting the most powerful sorcerers he can find. He wants a squad that can collectively defend their scores and potentially increase them even further. But wait. Megumi points toward the girl standing behind them and asks why on earth Reggie would even bother recruiting someone like her. It turns out she serves as perfect bait to lure other victims in, so Reggie decides to keep her around for a little while longer. Megumi can't even find the words to respond to her sheer innocence and naivety. Then Megumi gets straight to the point and asks Reggie if their group's total score adds up to 100 points yet. Reggie confirms that they definitely have enough, and that's when Megumi decides he's just going to rob them of everything. Naturally, that kills any chance of a peaceful negotiation, and the two sides immediately jump into a brutal fight. Out of nowhere, a young guy lunges from behind to catch Megumi off guard with a surprise attack. Right before the blow connects, the kid manages to slip into the shadows and launch a counterattack of his own. Meanwhile, Divine Dog lunges straight at Reggie. Megumi survives the initial burst, throws his opponent down a floor, and summons Nued to finish the guy off for good. Surprisingly, Megumi decides to let the girl go, telling her that he better not see her face ever again. On the other hand, Divine Dog isn't quite so lucky this time around, as Reggie manages to land several nasty stabs right into the poor pup's muzzle during the heat of the moment. Megumi was actually holding back his true power because he didn't want to kill them, he just wanted to secure the group's points for himself. After all, stealing points from others is way faster than trying to farm them manually. However, Reggie warns him that if Megumi keeps fighting without the intent to kill, he's the one who's going to end up dead. Right as he says that, an eyeball drops from above and triggers a massive, terrifying explosion right in Megumi's face. The culprit behind the blast finally shows himself, Hazunoki Irie, a man currently sitting on 35 points. His curse technique is incredibly gruesome as he rips off his own body parts and transforms them into high-yield explosives. Even though Megumi is tough as nails and manages to survive, he's found himself in a seriously desperate situation. To make matters worse, Remy, the girl Megumi was just trying to protect, suddenly turns and attacks him. She manipulates her hair like a weapon, aiming directly for the head of the Fushiguro. Megumi's patience finally hits rock bottom. He grabs her by the hair and slams her face first into the ground for being so incredibly foolish. Reggie launches another strike, using something that looks like ordinary paper but instantly transforms into gasoline. Iori follows up by blowing up his own teeth as projectiles. The combination of gasoline and explosives creates a raging inferno. Luckily, Megumi's reflexes are still sharp enough that he manages to dive into a nearby room just before the blast consumes everything, earning him some grudging respect from Reggie and Iori. Despite being tricked by Remy multiple times already, Megumi still goes out of his way to save her once they are inside the building. He's honestly showing a lot of restraint here given how many times she's tried to backstab him throughout this entire encounter. He gives Remy a stern warning, telling her that the last explosion could have easily killed both of them, and that those guys clearly view her life as completely worthless. He tells her to get lost as she understands, but Remy seems to have totally lost her grip on reality. She continues to frantically attack Megumi regardless of what he says. She demands that Megumi tell her he'll protect and love her, exactly the way Reggie promised he would. At this point, the clan head realizes this woman is just a pathetic, cheap tool. He regrets wasting his breath on her, thinking he should have never listened to a sob story from someone like her. Suddenly, the guy Megumi had thrown out of the building earlier reappears out of thin air. His name is Hari Chizuru, and he's packing a solid 28 points. Megumi realizes he's being completely surrounded now. It's a 4-on-1 situation, which is incredibly tense. But he has no choice because he needs those points to save his sister. Just as he's about to risk everything, Kogane pops up to announce the brand new rule that Higuruma just added. A cold, chilling smile spreads across Megumi's face. He now knows that his friend Yuji has succeeded, which means he doesn't necessarily have to throw his life away in this specific spot. He lunges forward to attack Hari immediately. However, Megumi is noticeably weakened after taking that explosion at point-blank range, so he tries to summon Toad to help coordinate a better attack. The coordination works, and he manages to restrain Hari, nearly choking the life out of him. He then summons Max Elephant to blast Hari back to where he started. Using Nu for mobility, Megumi closes the gap and delivers a crushing blow to Hari's face in midair. But this time, Megumi isn't being soft. His eyes are bloodshot with intensity. He dives down and coldly pulls out a knife to finish him with a headshot. Megumi has officially taken his first life in the game, seizing Hari's 5 points in the process. This display of ruthlessness shows a completely different side of Megumi now that Tsumeki's safety is somewhat guaranteed. He's no longer bound by any moral restrictions or hesitation. Now he's not just looking for points, he's looking to completely wipe out anything that stands in his path. Up in the air, Reggie and Iori are slowly floating down using a hovering umbrella. Reggie mocks Hari's death, saying it's a real shame since the guy actually had quite a few points on him. Meanwhile, Megumi is still feeling the after effects and dizziness from that initial explosion, making it impossible for him to just run away. Even though that crazy woman is gone, he's still facing 2 dangerous enemies. He considers using his domain expansion, but it's still incomplete and unrefined. If he fails to take them down quickly, his cursed energy will be totally drained. Megumi realizes there's a massive power gap here. Reggie's technique manipulates the physical properties of objects, and combined with Iori's explosive body parts and rapid healing, they are a lethal duo. The battle rages on as Iori spits out an explosive tooth directly at Megumi. But just as the blast is about to go off, a mysterious figure suddenly appears and takes the full force of the explosion right to the face. It's none other than Takaba Fumihiko, that weird comedian guy we saw the other day. Dressed in ridiculous, flashy outfit and with blood streaming down his face, he still stands tall and boldly declares that cowards who fight 2 against 1 will never be able to take him down. Takaba tells Megumi he's going to help him out because, at 35 years old, he can tell just by looking that Megumi is the one who's actually a good person. Reggie's crew wants to know exactly what kind of person Takaba is, Takaba thinks they're asking because they want to see his comedy routine. But that's not it at all. They want to know what era of sorcerer he belongs to. Regardless, Takaba insists they must want to see his act, and he prepares to give them a show. Takaba immediately launches a preemptive strike using a wordplay joke that is so incredibly dry and lame it's almost meaningless. The entire scene seems to shatter, and the battlefield freezes over. Reggie, Iori, and even Megumi are left standing there with completely blank expressions, trapped in a deadly and awkward silence. But you should never ever piss off a comedian when their performance is being ignored. Megumi feels like this older guy is a bit like Todo, whereas Todo judges people by their taste in women. Takaba seems to decide the fate of his enemies based on their sense of humor. Iori's indifferent attitude is exactly what triggers an explosive rage inside Takaba. Without hesitating for even a split second, Takaba lets out a roar and delivers a thunderous kick right to Iori's face, sending him flying. The sheer combat power and terrifying amount of cursed energy coming from this clown starts to increase, creating an insane bloodlust that even makes Reggie sweat through his clothes. Taking advantage of the total chaos, Megumi manipulates his shadow technique to suddenly appear, hoping to snatch Reggie's bird, but the old fox is quick enough to back away and dodge. Afterward, Megumi double-checks the info on Yuji and Haguruma once more, to be absolutely certain that Yuji successfully added the point transfer rule. The massive weight on Megumi's heart is finally lifted. He coldly turns his back, intending to drop the fight and just leave the barrier behind. However, Reggie lets out a roar, his bloodlust boiling over as he refuses to let such a valuable prize, and all those points slip through his fingers. A silent split-second agreement is made through eye contact between these two unlikely teammates. Takaba will take care of Iori, leaving the stage open for a fair one-on-one duel between Megumi and Reggie. Megumi tells him that, if possible, he should try to grab the points before the guy kicks the bucket. He also warns Takaba that Iori can turn his body parts into bombs and then use reverse curse technique to heal himself instantly. To put it simply, the guy is basically a walking, infinite bomb warehouse. Iori hurls an eyeball at Takaba, but the comedian just punches it right back at him, and the two of them dive into a flashy, high-speed exchange. However, Takaba is clearly the faster one. He easily circles around behind Iori and prepares to unleash the 1,000 Years of Death technique. That legendary hidden finger move from Kakashi hits Iori so hard it hurts to even watch. If he weren't wearing a diaper, he probably would have made a mess everywhere. Megumi feels relieved that Takaba isn't his enemy. Now it's just him and Reggie. Megumi tells him that his time is up. Since his business in this barrier is finished, Megumi is finally free to unleash his full power. The life and death struggle explodes with breathless intensity as Fushiguro Megumi goes on the hunt, and Reggie finds himself being pursued. Megumi unleashes a continuous chain of techniques, using the massive water pressure from Max Elephant to pin him down, but Reggie somehow pulls out a skateboard to glide away safely. He keeps using various receipts to manifest different objects to help him escape. When Megumi chases him into a narrow alley, Reggie has already set a trap with receipts spread out like explosive tags. He activates his technique, and a piano suddenly drops right toward Megumi's head. Fortunately, Megumi uses his rapid escape technique to shield himself from the impact. At this point, Reggie is starting to get nervous because Megumi has already figured out the basics of how his technique works. In reality, it functions more like a contract than a standard technique. The cunning Reggie immediately tries to flip the script by using his technique to sacrifice a receipt for a 5-star hotel service, allowing him to fully restore his stamina and health, putting an exhausted Megumi into an unfair life-or-death gamble. Not only that, but Reggie points out a weakness of the 10 Shadows technique. When a Shikigami is injured, it can't be summoned again. This means your dog can't come out to bite me anymore, he sneers. Realizing that a battle of endurance would be suicide right now, Megumi decides that retreating is the best option. He summons Nu to grab him and fly away at high speed. Reggie casually releases some drones to track him and calmly chases him on a moped like a cat playing with a mouse. Just as Megumi ducks into a dark gymnasium to catch his breath, 2 massive trucks suddenly ram through, threatening to crush everything in their path, even though he struggles to dodge and escape the collision. He still takes the full brunt of a follow-up attack from Reggie that leaves him dazed and reeling. As his vision starts to blur, Reggie lunges in, but Megumi manages to draw his sword and block it just in time. At such a close range, he gets tagged by countless receipts, and a barrage of objects flies in to crush him. Amidst the chaos, a knife successfully stabs into his hand, causing him immense pain. It's hard to tell how long Reggie has been collecting these things, but he has an insane amount of receipts. The truly terrifying part isn't just that he can recreate objects like Shikigami, but that he can actually issue commands to them. After all, a knife doesn't just fly on its own. Ignoring the insults, Megumi mutters about the complexity of a domain. He's tried multiple times, but still hasn't been able to overlay layers of imaginary space onto the real world perfectly. However, using his sharp intellect, Megumi decides to use the gymnasium itself as the physical foundation for his domain. A surge of thick, distorted black pressure suddenly erupts from beneath his feet, signaling the activation of his domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. Reggie is completely stunned, never imagining that Megumi was a sorcerer of such high caliber. Megumi mocks him, saying he never actually said he couldn't use a domain. Yeah, things are about to get really serious now that the domain is finally out. Reggie was caught completely off guard. Reggie was shocked. He never expected a kid like Megumi to have mastered a domain expansion. He quickly pulled himself together and activated Hollow Wicker Basket, an ancient anti-domain technique that was basically the ancestor to the modern simple domain. The technique was designed to cancel out a domain's guaranteed hit, and Reggie felt pretty safe until 4 toads suddenly rose out of the shadows. Before he could react, their tongues lashed out and wrapped tightly around his legs, pinning him down. Reggie was baffled, wondering how he could get hit when his defense was supposed to be ironclad. He didn't grasp the loophole because Megumi's domain was unfinished. The usual anti-domain rules didn't apply in the way he expected. Techniques like Hollow Wicker Basket don't actually shut down curse techniques themselves. They just mess with the domain's barrier to stop the sure hit effect from working. But Megumi's setup was a bit different from a standard domain. Megumi had basically just painted over the gym with his domain instead of building a proper barrier from scratch. Because of that, there was no programmed guaranteed hit for the anti-domain technique to actually target or cancel out. In its current messy state, Chimera Shadow Garden was basically just a massive power-up for the 10 Shadows technique. That flaw actually ended up being a secret weapon, because it left Reggie completely defenseless against Megumi's literal shadow play. Megumi didn't waste a second of Reggie's confusion, sending 2 shadow clones to jump him from the front. Reggie was getting hammered and had to retreat, manifesting a pair of combat knives to cut himself free from the toad's tongues. He tried to turn the tables with a machete, but another clone popped out of his own shadow and grabbed his leg, tossing him right toward the real Megumi. Megumi was ready and waiting, swinging his sword in a wide, lethal arc. Reggie managed to block the sword at the last second, but the effort left him wide open. A shadow clone took advantage of the gap and slammed an elbow right into his face. Reggie was starting to realize that this kid's tactics were on a whole different level. The way that clones and Shikigami had to physically manifest before attacking proved there was no auto-hit, but that actually made it scarier. It was more versatile and unpredictable than a standard domain, making it a nightmare to defend against. Reggie put 2 and 2 together. It was only a matter of time before Megumi used Max Elephant to turn the entire gym into an indoor pool and just drown him to end the fight once and for all. He wasn't going to let that happen, so he launched a desperate counterattack with a swarm of receipts. Megumi sent Nua to intercept them, but he was a split second too slow. The contractual recreation was already in motion. 3 full-size cars suddenly appeared in midair and sank right into the liquid shadow floor. This confirmed Reggie's theory. The entire domain was literally Megumi's shadow, and it worked just like a bottomless storage unit for tools and objects. Reggie figured out the catch. Megumi has to physically support the weight of everything he stores in his shadow. He decided to exploit that weakness, intending to pile on so much heavy junk that Megumi would be literally crushed under the pressure. Reggie thought he had the winning strategy and moved in to finish things. Megumi didn't look worried at all, though. He reminded Reggie that an incomplete domain is still a domain, and in this space, shadows were absolutely everywhere, including right over his head. Suddenly, Max Elephant manifested from the shadows on the ceiling and came crashing down right on top of Reggie. The fight instantly shifted into a grueling test of who could hold out longer under a massive crushing weight. Both of them were struggling to stay upright under the extreme pressure. Reggie was kicking himself for letting those trucks go earlier, but he kept his cool, knowing he still had one ace left up his sleeve. He managed to hold the elephant up with one arm while fishing for the right receipt. He was desperately searching for his trump card, but the elephant's weight was just too much. Reggie was forced down into the floor and swallowed up by the shadows. There was no air and no way to swim in there. He was just sinking into the void. As he sank deeper, his oxygen ran out and he started to black out. Megumi stayed perfectly still, waiting to make sure Reggie was completely done for before he let the domain drop. But then, something totally unexpected happened. One of those submerged cars suddenly floated to the top, bringing a soaking wet but very much alive Reggie with it. He explained that while his items usually vanish after use, he had intentionally kept the cars active so he could use one as a last-second life raft. Back on solid ground, Reggie went for the kill, summoning a full-blown 2-story wooden house that weighed at least 30 tons. He dropped it right on Megumi, hoping to crush him into a pancake once and for all. But the tables turned again. Even though Reggie looked like he had the upper hand, he suddenly found himself underwater again. Megumi had appeared behind him and was choking him out, using the weight of the shadow to drag him down and drown him. Reggie panicked and had to cancel his technique to lose the extra weight. In a flash, both of them broke the surface. As Reggie gasped for air, he realized they weren't in some shadow dimension anymore. They were in the gymnasium's actual basement pool. Reggie did the math. When the house started falling, Megumi must have dived into his own shadow and deactivated the domain to avoid the impact. The falling building then smashed through the floor, sending Reggie plummeting into the pool below. It was a mystery how Megumi could move under all that weight, but Reggie guessed the kid must have ejected himself from the shadow space at the perfect moment. As Reggie crawled out of the water, Megumi was already there waiting for him. Megumi looked down at him and pointed out the obvious. Those soaking wet receipts were probably useless now. Reggie didn't admit it, instead hitting back with the claim that Megumi was too drained to summon any more Shikigami himself. Megumi didn't disagree, noting that the battle was now going to be settled with old-fashioned fists. Reggie made the first move and immediately started dominating Megumi in hand-to-hand combat, showing off his superior close-quarters experience. Megumi was barely holding on against the non-stop beating. Reggie was just about to deliver the final hit when he suddenly froze. Out of nowhere, a lethal strike ripped through him, tearing away a chunk of his face, his ear, and a good portion of his shoulder. Reggie spun around in shock to find the attacker. It was Megumi's divine dog. It turns out the Shikigami hadn't been destroyed at all. Megumi explained that his partner was way too tough to be taken out by a few cheap kitchen knives. Reggie took the loss like a man. He called up his Kogane and transferred every single one of his 41 points over to Megumi, telling him to consider it a parting gift. Shortly after that, he succumbed to his massive injuries and died. Kogane pinged Megumi with another 5 points for the kill, and he finally walked out of that gym with the mission in the bag. But over in another part of the city, the peace was shattered by a massive explosion on a skyscraper rooftop. Iori was still locked in a desperate struggle with Takaba, trying his absolute hardest to blow the comedian sky high. However, Takaba was like a brick wall, standing his ground and weathering every single blast with a bizarre, unflinching resilience that suggested he wasn't going anywhere. Takaba is radiating pure confidence, keeping up his relentless mockery of his opponent while hilariously demanding that he actually concentrate on the fight. Aori, whose patience is clearly at its absolute limit because of Takaba's weird behavior, lunges forward to land a heavy punch, only for his fist to slide away without making any impact at all. That strike didn't just miss. It was as if he was trying to punch a greased lightning bolt. Takaba's skin was inexplicably slippery, drenched in some kind of bizarre sauce that turned the whole battle into a total farce. The more Aori tried to fight seriously, the more his blood pressure continued to rise from the sheer absurdity of the exchange. He was trapped in a nightmare where no matter how many explosions he set off or how many heavy hits he landed, Takaba simply refused to take any meaningful damage. His train of thought was suddenly derailed by the arrival of Kogane, who casually announced to the room that Reggie had already been eliminated from the game. Iori took a moment to process this news before deciding he had reached his limit with this whole situation. Without saying another word, he turned his back and started to walk away, loudly declaring that he was simply going home. Takaba, assuming his opponent was retreating like a coward, remembered Megumi's specific request and started pestering Iori to hand over his points. Of course, every single one of his attempts was met with a blunt and flat refusal. Then we get the explanation for all the madness. Takaba's innate cursed technique allows him to manifest anything he genuinely thinks is funny into actual reality. It is a power so incredibly broken that it could even hold its own against a monster like Satoru Gojo. The craziest part of it all is that Takaba remains completely oblivious to just how much power he truly possesses. Elsewhere, Remy is sprinting through the city streets in a state of absolute panic. Now that Reggie is gone, she has no idea what to do with herself or where to turn next. She had spent her entire life convinced that men were supposed to be wolves, there to protect and take care of her, and she just assumed another person would step in to fill that void. But that fantasy was violently shattered when she found herself cornered by a real predator, the divine dog, with its teeth bared and ready to strike. Just as the beast was about to lunge for the kill, Sumiki's voice cut through the air, telling her brother to stand down before he committed a cold-blooded murder. The divine dog vanished into thin air instantly, leaving a shell-shocked Remy trembling and unable to believe she had actually been spared. Across the city, Megumi could feel his sister's interference, and it filled him with a growing sense of frustration. But his body had reached its limit. The sheer exhaustion finally won out, and he collapsed onto the ground where he stood. High above his unconscious form, the mysterious angel appeared, hovering silently in the air. She remained completely unseen by Megumi, which is ironic considering she was the very person he had been searching for this entire time. While the Tokyo colonies were starting to quiet down for the moment, far to the north in the Sendai colony, the violence was reaching a much more brutal and vicious peak. In this area, 4 absolute powerhouses had the entire colony locked in a terrifying stalemate. Their collective power was so immense that none of them dared to disturb the balance of power. The first of these titans was Druve, a man who once conquered the entire archipelago during a massive civil war. He's currently sitting on a pile of 91 points and controls 2 massive Shikigami, whose specific flight paths actually form a domain. The second major player is Ryu Ishigori, who has 77 points and boasts the single highest raw cursed energy output of any player currently active in the culling games. The third powerhouse is Takako Oro, who has 70 points and possesses the terrifying ability to manipulate the sky as if it were a physical surface. The final member of this group is Kurorushi, a special grade cockroach curse that was released by Konjaku through his cursed spirit manipulation. With 54 points to its name, this insect nightmare had been staying dormant, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge and strike. Their different powers, abilities, and conflicting motives were so balanced that they'd been trapped in a tense standoff. But that balance was obliterated the second Yuta Okotsu entered the colony and slaughtered Druve. Takako and Ryu sensed the shift in power immediately, as Druve's patrolling Shikigami vanished into thin air. Both of them wasted no time ordering their personal Kogain to show them the player who had just received a massive point update, which revealed Yuta as the person responsible for the kill. They both understood that the death of one powerhouse meant the rise of an even more dangerous new threat. Meanwhile, Kurorushi's awakening was getting closer, and with it came the kind of chaos that both of them secretly looked forward to. Yuta, meanwhile, had regrouped with the civilians he was protecting and was moving them into the stadium that Druve used as a base. He tried to reassure the survivors that they would be safe there, and told them to get some rest, but he was interrupted by an ominous, loud, buzzing sound. Instantly on high alert, he ordered everyone to get inside while he went to find the source of the noise. It arrived in the form of a massive, terrifying swarm of cockroaches that were relentlessly chasing down a man who was running for his life. Yuta lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm and vaulting over the insects, but he wasn't able to get enough distance. The bugs stripped the man's lower body down to the bone in an instant. The swarm didn't stop there. They turned their hunger toward Yuta next, and he barely managed to put up a block in time. Every single one of those cockroaches was a real, physical creature, but they were reinforced with cursed energy, making them significantly faster and more dangerous than any normal insect. Things got even worse as the swarm started to break apart, with some of the insects heading into the stadium to hunt down the rest of the civilians. Without a moment's hesitation, Yuta summoned Rika, who smashed a nearby bridge with one massive hit, dropping the structure onto the swarm to force them back toward him. Ready for their counterattack, Yuta channeled a massive amount of cursed energy into his sword and swung it with enough force to unleash a devastating blast wave. The strike completely obliterated the swarm in a single blow, but the true master of the insects emerged shortly after, Kurorushi, the special grade cockroach curse. Yuta used his Kogane to confirm that this creature was indeed an active player in the game. It turns out Kurorushi had been dormant for so long because it had a terrible matchup against Druve, but now that he was gone, its hunger was driving it straight toward Yuta. Yuta took a moment to assess his priorities and the situation. He knew that his resources were infinite and that eventually they would need a rule to allow people to move between colonies, but he also knew that dangerous monsters like Druve and Kurorushi could never be allowed to leave. He realized that communication between the different colonies was going to be essential to prevent that from happening. This meant that the rules Megumi had proposed during the meeting with Tengen would need to be expanded. In the end, they were going to need 4 rules in total to manage the situation. With his resolve hardened, Yuta prepared himself for the battle. He was determined to take down Konjaku and earn 400 points all by himself, if that's what it took. Kurorushi then revealed its weapon, the festering life sword, an enchanted blade infused with the powers of life and death, and lunged forward. Yuta didn't hesitate to respond, severing Kurorushi's arm in a split second. He used his blade to pin the severed limb to a nearby rock before following up with a brutal backhand strike that sent the special grade curse skidding across the surface of the water. Kurorushi took to the air, trying to get above a nearby bridge, but Yuta was already one step ahead of him. He ripped a metal railing off the bridge and threw it like a spear, impaling the curse with perfect precision. He followed up immediately with a diving slash, driving Kurorushi back down into the water. The curse managed to stop the blade by using a thick mass of cockroaches as a shield, but Yuta just swept the insects aside and forced them back. Kurorushi then gathered the swarm into a swirling tornado beneath its feet, using the bugs as a platform to stay mobile. Yuta stayed perfectly calm, fully aware that both Ryu and Takako were lurking nearby and watching his every move. He knew he could end the fight with Kurorushi in an instant by flooding it with positive energy. just like he did when he revived Yuji. However, he had no intention of showing off his reverse curse technique while his potential rivals were observing him. He also couldn't call Rika back to his side because she was still busy defending the civilians, meaning he would have to win this fight without using either of his trump cards. Kurorushi broke the silence, demanding to know why Yuta was interfering with its feeding process. Yuta just countered by asking the curse why it felt the need to kill people in the first place. The curse's reply was chillingly simple. It just really enjoyed the taste of iron. With that, Kurorushi unleashed its earth and insect trance, conjuring a swarm of flying insect curses that were carrying massive sacks of toxins. He commanded the swarm to move in a deadly circling pattern around Yuta, trapping him in the middle of the storm. The special grade sorcerer stabbed his blade into the shallow water, creating a powerful shockwave that blasted the swarm back. But the flying insects were clever and swooped in from behind him. Yuta cut them down, but the toxin sacks exploded upon impact, momentarily blinding him. Seeing the opening, Kurorushi lunged forward with the festering life sword and closed the distance to Yuta in a flash. The blade came down in a vicious arc, and although Yuta caught the strike on his sword just in time, the enchanted weapon still released something that burrowed into his shoulder. He retreated instantly, trying to gain some distance and assess the damage, but the trap had already been sprung. Within seconds, tiny insect-like curses started crawling out from inside the wound, literally tearing through his flesh as they emerged from his body. Visibly shocked by the attack, Yuta slashed at the creatures, severing them as they came out. But that split second of distraction was exactly where Kurorushi needed to strike again. This time, it slashed across Yuta's stomach, opening a deep wound that birthed even more curses from within. From a safe distance, Ryu and Takako were watching the struggle with an increasing amount of interest. Kurorushi, sensing that victory was finally within his grasp, grabbed onto Yuta's body with the full intention of devouring him whole as its prize. But just as the cockroach curse pulled him in close, Yuta grabbed its face with both hands and actually bit into it. He funneled his reverse curse technique as pure energy output directly into the curse's head, causing a massive explosion of positive energy. The blast ripped through Kurorushi, shattering its body into tiny pieces. Yuta spat out the remains as his Kogane appeared, officially awarding him 5 points for taking down the special grade curse. Even though he was weakened, Yuta barely had time to catch his breath before Takahiro made her move. Sensing that he was vulnerable, she approached him in total silence, floating upside down behind him until she was close enough to whisper into his ear. Yuta was caught off guard and turned to face her, but before he could even react, the air around him warped violently. Takako's curse technique distorted the space itself, creating a massive, crushing blast wave that sent Yuta flying backward. He managed to minimize the damage while he was in midair, but he was still unsure how she had managed to generate that kind of overwhelming force. Tako pressed her advantage, charging forward with a strike that Yuta managed to evade before countering with a punch of his own. But then, the space around his arm twisted unnaturally, causing the shape of his limb to bend in ways that should have been physically impossible. Confused by the distortion, Yuta barely had time to process what was happening before Takako drove an elbow into his face, sending him stumbling back. Almost immediately, his arm snapped back to its normal shape as if nothing had ever happened to his anatomy. This led him to the conclusion that her technique warps the space around an object without actually harming it, much like how a lens distorts light. Takako, as if she could sense what he was thinking, decided to clarify her power by treating the sky itself as if it were a solid surface. To demonstrate, she reached out and grabbed an empty patch of air, pulling it forward as if it were a piece of fabric and making the intangible sky feel completely solid. Yuta, watching this closely, questioned why she would waste her strength seeking conflict in the first place. Her answer had a sharp, bitter edge to it. She explained that incarnated sorcerers like her had returned from the underworld, and this culling game was the very first step in their new lives. Kenjaku's role in setting the whole thing up only made the stakes higher. She intended to gather as many points as possible to make sure she was prepared for whatever lay ahead in this new world. Still not satisfied with her answer, Yuta pressed on, questioning why she was so desperate, which finally pushed Takako's temper over the edge. She snapped at him and accused him of being a pampered descendant of the Fujiwara clan, someone who could never possibly understand her motives. But before the tension could get any worse, Ryu intervened from a distance, standing on a nearby rooftop. He unleashed his signature Granite Blast, sending a massive, overwhelming wave of cursed energy toward both fighters. The resulting explosion absolutely tore through the battlefield, filling the air with a thick cloud of smoke and flying debris. When the dust finally cleared, Yuta emerged from the wreckage very much alive. Although he was a bit rattled by the sheer scale of Ryu's attack, he recognized immediately that Ryu was a serious threat who would need to be handled quickly. Takako came to the exact same conclusion at the same time. Now that the deadlock between the colony's 4 powerhouses had finally been broken, taking out Ryu seemed like a perfectly viable path forward. With both of them deciding to go all out, Yuta was the first to move. He sprinted toward Ryu while the long-range fighter fired a non-stop storm of cursed energy beams. Yuta showed off some incredible agility to weave through the barrage, but a second wave of attacks caused the bridge beneath him to collapse into nothing. For a brief moment, Ryu looked almost disappointed, thinking the fight had ended too quickly. That was until the smoke cleared and he realized Yuta was gone. In the very next instant, Yuta suddenly appeared right on the rooftop with him. He had used the hole Rika had made in the bridge as cover to avoid the blast and close the distance. Bringing the fight into close quarters, Yuta forced Ryu into a direct confrontation. Ryu managed to block the initial strike and immediately countered with a flurry of blows. The two of them engaged in a high-speed sequence of jabs, parries, and deflections, with each of them perfectly reading the other's timing. They both spun at the same time to deliver heavy strikes, clashing back-to-back before Ryu channeled the burst of cursed energy through his spine. The blast was powerful enough to send Yuta flying through the air. He smashed through the top of a building but managed to land on his feet and regain his balance. Ryu followed up without a moment's pause, hurling another massive granite blast at him. To his absolute shock, Yuta deflected the energy beam with his bare hands, forcing it aside. Ryu hesitated for a split second, and Yuta seized the opening, closing the gap with a crushing right hook that seemed to crack the very air itself. Undeterred by the hit, Ryu countered with another cursed energy beam that was strong enough to overpower Yuta's strike and send him airborne again. Before Yuta could even stabilize himself, Takako appeared out of nowhere to join the fray. Her technique wasn't targeting Yuta himself, but rather the surface of the sky, which she shattered like a sheet of thin ice. She then unleashed her extension technique, the thin icebreaker, which sent Yuta crashing down into the wreckage of another building. Ryu was clearly annoyed by the interference and sent a wave of cursed energy at Takako, demanding that she stay out of his way. She just ignored him and used her technique to reflect the beam right back at him, marking the first time in his life he'd been hit by his own attack. In the middle of all the chaos, Yuta emerged from the rubble once again, looking battered but completely unyielding. His sheer resilience actually seemed to amuse Takako, who declared that she was going to toy with him a little bit longer before finishing him off. Ryu was watching the fight carefully and noticed that Yuta was constantly healing himself with the reverse curse technique. He judged that even with Yuta's massive reserves, he had to be nearing depletion. What neither of them realized was that Yuta hadn't even unleashed his full strength yet. Finally, he slid a ring onto his finger and called out to Rika, his voice steady as he asked her to give him everything she had. The moment that ring was on his finger, Rika erupted into her full manifestation right beside him, her energy shaking the entire battlefield. Both Ryu and Takako froze for a heartbeat, realizing with a shock that everything they had seen up until now was just Yuta holding back. Rika didn't care about their reactions. She casually tore her own chest open, revealing an entire arsenal of cursed tools stored inside her body. With the connection between them complete, Yuta now had direct access to her energy and could channel his copied techniques freely. He also had Rika herself fighting by his side for a 5-minute window of unrestrained battle. Without hesitation, he slid a metal arm casing onto his forearm. He used it to reinforce his strikes before sending Rika flying toward Takako. The sky-manipulating sorcerer readied herself to use her technique, but before she could act, Yuta formed a specific sigil with his mouth the mark of the Inumaki clan and issued a command. He shouted a single, resounding command for her not to move. Takako tried to shield herself, but the cursed speech hit home instantly, freezing her in place. Yuta and Rika then descended on her in unison, pummeling her with a relentless storm of blows before the effect faded. Yuta vaulted off Rika's arm to keep up the pressure. Ryu tried to intervene by firing a searing beam of cursed energy, but Rika blocked it with one hand as if it were a minor annoyance. Irritated by the attack, Rika retaliated with a brutal punch to Ryu's face. The hit sent him sprawling across the ground. She moved to follow up, but Ryu rebounded quickly, countering with an explosive strike that actually managed to push her back. Excitement gleamed in his eyes as he adjusted his hair, ready for the next round of his fight against Rika. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the battlefield, Yuta's assault on Takako continued without a break. He summoned a group of small flying shikigami, weaving them together with strands of his own hair. Takako destroyed one of them instantly with her technique. Her temper flared as she accused the Fujiwara of always standing in her path, afraid of what she could eventually become. It was then revealed that she had once been the leader of a top-tier assassin squad that worked directly under that specific clan. She had lived a life defined by invisibility and absolute loyalty, existing only as a tool for the Fujiwara until a name was finally bestowed upon her. But that gesture wasn't out of respect. It was a cold setup so she could be legally executed for crimes her masters committed. That singular act of betrayal birthed a hatred that would span across lifetimes. Her inner monologue was violently interrupted when the orbiting shikigami carved deep, painful gashes across her torso and hips. As the blood began to flow, she analyzed the trajectory of the spirits and realized they were moving in the exact same circular patterns that Drew's familiars used to create his domain. The puzzle pieces finally fell into place. Yuta wasn't restricted to a single type of cursed energy or a specific clan's technique. He was a mimic of the highest order, capable of stealing the variabilities of those he had defeated. However, understanding his nature didn't save her from the physical reality of his incoming attack. Yuta hammered her down toward the pavement where the earth-shaking duel between Ryu and Riko was currently unfolding. He dove after her, putting everything into a heavy straight punch. But she managed to catch his hand. She activated her thin icebreaker technique, which caused the metal gauntlet on his arm to explode into fragments. Despite his armor being destroyed, Yuta didn't lose his composure for a second. He looked her in the eyes and told her that regardless of the sins of the past, a selfish existence without purpose would eventually leave her with nothing. His moralizing only served to make her even more furious as she prepared to retort. But the words died in her throat as a massive, suffocating pressure filled the air. Ryu Ishigori was building up his energy to its absolute limit, and the atmosphere became so heavy it was hard to breathe. Knowing that the next few seconds would decide everything, all three legendary fighters unleashed their domain expansions at once. The three separate barriers collided and overlapped, causing a massive interference that completely neutralized their guaranteed hit abilities. This effectively turned the high-level sorcery battle into a grueling contest of pure physical skill and speed. Both Ryu and Taka realized Rika was the wild card and worked together to lock her out of the structure. They knew that if the Queen of Curses managed to force her way inside, the balance would shift entirely in Yuta's favor. Rika was stranded outside, unable to reach her master immediately, but she wasn't going to just sit there and watch. Her energy began to boil over in a rage, just as a fourth player unexpectedly entered the field. Against all odds, Kururushi the monster Yuta had supposedly killed reappeared right inside the domain's barrier. At the same time, an endless wave of reinforced cockroaches flooded the exterior to keep Rika busy. The three sorcerers were momentarily stunned as they tried to figure out how a dead curse could be standing right in front of them. The terrifying reality of the curse's biology became clear. Before it went to sleep, it had actually reproduced asexually. When the original body was obliterated by Yuta, the collective terror of the population provided enough cursed energy to fully manifest the offspring. Now this new iteration of the special grade curse was back to reclaim its spot in the deadlock. The threat was far from over because Kururushi the curse was still very much alive and kicking despite the chaos. That sudden violent intrusion caused the barriers to lose their structural integrity, and the entire domain came crashing down, thrusting the combatants back out under the vast open sky. It didn't take Yuta more than a heartbeat to notice the shift in the battlefield dynamics. It was obvious that Takako's eyes were locked onto Kururushi, a foe whose very existence made her own technique feel like a disadvantage. Taking full advantage of that split-second distraction, Yuta slipped behind her and delivered a powerful kick that sent her flying directly into the curse's reach. That cockroach spirit didn't hesitate for a second and reacted instantly to her forced approach. The curse lunged forward with terrifying speed, brandishing its gruesome, festering life sword right at her. Takako desperately tried to manifest her spatial cursed technique for a defense, but being fresh off a domain expansion meant her fine motor control and cursed energy flow were totally faltering. Her ability to manipulate the fabric of space just wouldn't respond the way she needed. The power she tried to summon basically burned away in her palm before it could form. Kuroshi's blade found its mark, slicing clean through her left arm, and disgusting insect curses began to sprout from the raw wound even as the limb was falling away. Rika acted in a flash, devouring the entire severed arm in one go, which earned a scream of pure, unadulterated fury from Takako. Takako let out a furious, pained shout that echoed across the field. From just a short distance away, Ryu shouted at her to just stay down and quit while she was ahead, smugly remarking that neither she nor that filthy Kururushi were ever actually invited to sit at his high-stakes table in the first place. His subsequent granite blast was an absolute monster, roaring across the field and slamming into both Takako and Kururushi with devastating force. Takako was instantly incapacitated and dropped to the ground. And in that moment of pure destruction, the full extent of Ryu's unique curse technique was finally revealed for all to see. The technique was known as Cursed Energy Discharge, a truly rare and terrifying ability that allowed him to output the same overwhelming peak power whether his main technique was currently active or not. Even with half of its disgusting body destroyed by the blast, Kurushi was somehow still alive, twitching as it tried to crawl toward Ryu. It was heading for Ryu, but Yuta moved quickly to finish it off for good with a precise strike of positive energy. This final blow left only the two remaining heavy hitters of the Sendai colony still standing on the battlefield. They stood there, facing each other down without so much as a single flinch between them. A silent, mutual agreement seemed to pass between the two fighters in that moment. They were going to go all out and settle this once and for all. Their massive cursed energies clashed in an epic beam struggle that lit up the area, but Yuta's blast was eventually overpowered by Ryu's raw output, forcing him to slide backward. Reacting to the pressure, Rika unleashed her own searing blast of concentrated cursed energy directly at Ryu. The resulting explosion turned the air into a wall of fire, and Yuta perfectly timed his leap with the shockwave, riding the incredible force forward at a speed that was almost too fast for the eye to follow. Ryu's eyes narrowed with realization as he saw that Rika was capable of firing off attacks completely independently of Yuta, though he impressively caught the energy beam with his bare hand. He grinned wildly, boasting that he could match anything Yuta threw at him, and then without a moment of hesitation he aimed his granite blast right at the special grade sorcerer. He fired directly at the special grade. Fully convinced that Yuta's energy reserves had to be hit hard from that domain expansion and all the constant healing he'd been doing. However, he was completely unaware of the fact that Yuta's technique had already fully replenished itself. In the very next heartbeat, the flow of energy shifted dramatically. The energy dynamic changed in a flash. The devastating blast that should have obliterated Yuta suddenly twisted and warped, curving sharply upward into the clouds above. Ryo's eyes widened in absolute shock as the realization hit him that Yuta was actually utilizing Tekkako's unique curse technique. He was using her ability to warp the very space around him. All the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place for Ryu. Rika devouring Takako's severed arm earlier wasn't just random. That was when Yuta fulfilled the specific condition required to copy her spatial ability for his own use. But he didn't have long to process it. That realization came just a second too late to matter. Yuta stepped into his range and drove a thin, piercing icebreaker strike directly into Ryu's chest. The impact sent Ryu staggering backward. And before he could even think about recovering his footing, Rika slammed down a brutal, bone-crushing punch. The strike rattled his skull and left blood streaming down from the fresh wound. By this point, the 5-minute time limit since Yuta had put on his ring had officially run out. The full link to Rika was severed, and her fully manifested form began to dissipate into nothingness. Even while bleeding, Ryu remained undeterred and saw his chance to strike back. He funneled every ounce of his remaining power into a single massive granite blast aimed directly at Rika's fading silhouette. Even though she was a special grade manifestation, the sheer force of that impact was simply too much to handle. Rika vanished completely from the battlefield, leaving Yuta to stand alone against Ryu for the final showdown. Ryu was grinning like a madman despite the blood coating his face, and he called this final direct exchange the delicious dessert he had been craving for so long. Yuta didn't show even a flicker of hesitation. He closed the distance in an instant, grabbing Ryu with both hands and driving them downward with such intense pressure that the very ground beneath their feet began to shatter and crack. Ryu was caught totally off guard and found himself momentarily immobilized by the raw strength. The sheer force of the hold was overwhelming. Yuta calmly declared that the entire fight was over, which left Ryu looking momentarily puzzled until the sky itself gave him the answer. That massive granite blast Ryu had fired at Rika earlier came raining back down, having been redirected by Yuta's spatial warping. Using the space warping technique he copied from Takako, Yuta sent the attack right back at its source. The blast struck Ryu with a heavy impact, slamming him into the dirt. As he lay there, completely battered and defeated, Ryu finally pieced together what happened. He had been taken down by the force of his own attack, but strangely, he wasn't mad. Instead of feeling any anger, a deep sense of satisfaction washed over him. This battle had turned out to be everything he could have ever hoped for in a fight. He looked at Yuta and thanked him, admitting that his long-standing hunger for a real challenge had finally been satisfied.